We will start now. It's 5 minutes past 9, so I guess it's the good time to start now. Still, a lot of you are registering, but we will start because the program of the day is quite heavy. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, so wherever you are. And welcome to this 53 International Ocean Liège Colloquium and Third Gone Oxygen Conference. And to open this colloquium, we have the pleasure to have with us Professor Pierre Wolper, Rector of the Liège University, who will say a few words of welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and welcome to all present or distant to this meeting and to the University of Liège. Well, you are here for those who are on site in the historical room of the university. The university was established in 1817. And at that time, Belgium was under Dutch rule. So that's why you see King William of the Netherlands in the painting, which is here above the screen. And you see the W for William on the ceiling in gold letters. This room actually was built a little bit later than the university. It was inaugurated in the 1820s. The University of Liège has grown a lot since it was founded in 1817. Now we have about 25,000 students, more than 5,000 members of staff. We have our main campus here in the city center, our historical campus, but a larger part of our campus is outside of the city in the Saint-Mart area, which is a hill just a few kilometers away from the city. There are various areas in which we are very active, and studying oceans is certainly one. And I'll come back to that, but we also not only look at the oceans, we also look up to the stars. Our astronomy department is quite strong, and we also have a big research center dealing with the space instruments and testing of satellites and instruments. The life sciences are also very present in our university, because we have both a medical school, a vet school, and of course a faculty of sciences where a lot of biology is being studied. And oceanography and oceans have been for a long time a topic which is sort of prominent in our university. Actually, across the river, we have a big aquarium where we have all sorts of species of fish being displayed and living there. And we also have a research center in the Mediterranean in Corsica near the town of Calvi. Now, this meeting is a recurring meeting at the University of Liège and is, I think, something which was emblematic of our activity in the area. And when I looked at the program, I thought, well, this is really a central topic for our humanity at this point. We know that we are trying to manage the Earth, more or less. We've done some things which are detrimental to our planet. And we're trying to understand really what's going on and see how we can get over the current crisis of our climate evolving maybe much faster and in a way which we would not think is very positive for humanity and for the Earth as a whole. Now, the name of the Congress, Ocean Dynamics, is very emblematic because dynamics means you have a changing system and we're trying to understand how it evolves. It's clear that the oceans play a very big role in the future of our planet, but we don't know enough probably about how the oceans interact with the rest of the planet. And this is a difficulty that we're trying to cope with. The other difficulty is that what happens in the ocean is a mix of physics and also of life sciences, because of course animals and all sorts of living cells living in the oceans are instrumental to what happens and how they evolve. So I think you have for this meeting a most challenging topic. I looked at the program and see a lot of very interesting talks for something which is essential to our future. So the best I can do is wish you a very productive meeting, moving forward, interacting, and also, of course, enjoying your stay in our city. Thank you very much.
No, next slide. Okay, I can change it myself. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so now it's my turn. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, okay. No, we cannot hear me. Oh no, okay. Je fais une queue de cheval. Okay. Non.
Non, si c'est une manière, tu
Fais comme ça.
fais une queue dans la pièce. Tes cheveux. Merci.
C'est pas joli comme ça, si. Okay. Yeah. So welcome to all of you. I am Marie-Laure Grégoire and from the Liège University, and with Andreas Oschries, who is there from Guillaume. We are both the co-chair of the Global Ocean Oxygen Network, and we would like to warmly welcome you to this 53rd Liège Colloquium and Third Gone Oxygen Conference. It's a very big pleasure to be with you today and to have a full week to talk about oxygen and low oxygen environment and the oxygenation. The path to go there has been quite difficult, sometimes hectic, but the most important is that we are all here today in presence here, but also at distance, and we will do our best to try to exchange each other and to feel very well with each other, to enjoy time here in Liège. We do as much as we can for this objective. So now just a brief history about the Liège Colloquium. So some of you may not know the colloquium and may wonder why we have an ocean colloquium at the Liège University, which is located 200 kilometers from the sea. And the reason is that 54 years ago, Jack Newell, who was a supervisor of my PhD, decided to have a meeting to talk about the ocean. Mostly it was hydrodynamics and turbulence, but then after it evolved towards a diversity of topics. And so here you can see the list of topics that we had in the past during the last 20 years about the Liège Colloquium. And so you can see that it's quite diverse. We have spoken about the small scale, but also about the long-term scale, the climate scale. We are speaking about the physics. We are speaking about the biology, the chemistry, and also the biogeochemistry. We are speaking about observation, satellite, in situ, but also models. And we are speaking about the deep ocean, coastal ocean, polar ocean, and today, low oxygen environment. So it's really a long tradition. And yeah, we also tried to do the same with the Oxygen Conference. And so we have started to launch this tradition as well, as you know, maybe. And so each 3 years, more or less, we try to have an Oxygen Conference. And so we had one in Toulouse in 2011, organized by Véronique Garçon here. And then we have the Liège Colloquium in 2014. I guess that some of you were there. We have the Kiel Conference organized by Andreas in 2018. And so we have the colloquium this year, 2022, and we will try to continue this tradition. The colloquium has evolved, of course. So we have 50 years of our in-presence meeting. Last year, we were fully online due to the COVID. And this year, this is what we are trying to do, to be in presence and to be in remote. And we would really like to have the people at distance, putting the camera on in order to just to see each other. Normally people at distance can see us here. We have 2 cameras, one on me and one on you. And so the idea is really to try to make like we are all together. So who are there today? So here is a map that shows the origin of the people that are coming here. So that are participating to the colloquium, not only here, but everywhere, also online. So we have 263 people that are registered to the colloquium, with 45% of women. You know that we will have a diversity and equity panel on Thursday, so I put some statistics. 23 as keynotes, and 78 as panelists, which is better. Keynotes we have to improve, we know that. On site, we have 186 people, and online, not yet know, but during the week, and online 67, 23 countries, and from the 6 continents. So we are very happy. Because when you see the situation, and when we have this increase of the Omicron in January, we had a GON meeting and we say, what do we have to do to postpone to go online? And GON decided to have an insight meeting for the young people essentially, but also for the less young people because it's so much needed. So then we have to do this hybrid meeting. We decided to do it hybrid because we would like to engage with all the world, with Asia, and with this different part of the world. And so we had to build a dream team, and the dream team is there. It's all these young people that you can see here. And so I will start to give them 1 minute to present what they do for the colloquium, and they will give you information on the tool that we have prepared for you for the week. So first team, it's the IT Padlet team, and I will give the word to Lauren. But Lauren is not alone. We also have Cécile Pujol, and we have Rihanna, who is there. And Cécile, I don't know where you are. Maybe she's upstairs in the registration.
Cécile is hiding over there in the back of the room.
She's there. Yeah. Okay.
So hi, I'm Lauren. So together with Rihanna and Cécile, we did the Padlet. So yeah. So if you look at the back of your badge, you have a QR code that you can scan. This is the same as this one. And this is going to take you to this Padlet you can find over there, which is a chronology Padlet. This is going to be the main Padlet of the week, with link to the program, the code of conduct, and also link to other Padlets. Two kind of other Padlets. The first one is Padlets of the day, like this. So we'll have a column for each talk and each event during the day. And there you can put comments, links underneath the column. We also have a Padlet for the posters. This one is very important because it's the only one, well, it's the place where the people online will be able to see the posters. So for the people that haven't sent the poster yet, we really, really need them for tonight. Otherwise, your poster will not be on the Padlet. And so, as I said, you can comment below. So as for the talk, each column on the poster Padlet is a poster. And the poster Padlet is also very important because you will be able to the Jacques Murel Best Poster Award for Young Scientists, which will be awarded to the best poster for young scientists. You can recognize the people that are registered to this contest because they have like a little sprout in front of the title. And you can vote by liking their poster on the Padlet. And the award will be given on Wednesday during the gala. So really important, go to the Padlet. And yeah, you can find all the information on the different Padlets. You can find information in the PDF you received, and you can ask questions to me, Rihanna, or Cécile, if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so then next part, the next team is the IT Zoom team. So it's all the people that are taking care of the Zoom. We have 3 computers. And so we have here Loïc Massé, Loïc, oh yeah, he's there. So we have Yevgeny Ivanov is there at the back. Then we have Bruno Fetelian, he's there. And we have Guillaume Sicorello, sorry, he is there. And we have also Thomas Duquesne that you have seen, but I was not able to find his picture. And then we have Basile. And Basile will give you a few words about the Zoom and all what you have to know.
So hello everyone. I will be more addressing to the online people because it's important. Please, if you are online, keep your microphone off unless you are allowed to speak, but we will give you the permission to activate your microphone. Then we would like you to activate your video because it's nicer if we can see your face in the room. We have a screen display that allows us to see you. If you have any problems online, you can refer to the PDF we sent you earlier or address us some private message. We'll try to answer your problem very quickly. And for the presentations, if you are online, you will be able to move the slides from our computer. We will give you remote access to our computer. So you will be able to pass the slide. Please be careful. There is a slight delay at around 3 seconds. And we would like you to be careful and to take your time, because the slide will switch, but there is a few steps you need to do. The first thing is when we give you the access through the remote access, please click on the screen to be sure that the presentation is loaded correctly. Then you could navigate through your PowerPoint using the arrows, but there is a delay between the display in our computer and what you are going to see. So don't panic. The slide will move, but please be careful to not push 3 times on the button, otherwise we will be lost in your presentation. Then that's all. Enjoy your online meeting, despite the fact that you're not with us, but please enjoy it.
Yeah, thanks, Basile. Okay, so then we have the logistic team. So we have here many people. Some of you, many of you have already interacted with Mariela. She was doing a wonderful job. And then you can see also the other people, so Catherine, Caroline, Cécile, and Jean-Michel, who take care of the website. It was very, very, very nice. And then the last team that I would like to present is the master student team. So we try to build a network of master student and bachelor student, and because they ask to be linked to the colloquium, and so we try to do that. And some master student have initiated a kind of media interaction in order to join with the student everywhere in the world. And so Mutia, you have a few seconds just to introduce and to explain what they have to do.
Thank you, Marie-Laure. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you here. I'm standing here to represent, on behalf of my amazing friends in Early Good Network team. So we are a group of young scientists gathered in an interdisciplinary network under the GOND for supporting the GOOD program. And we envision to take part in transforming the ocean science into the ocean action by, for example, translating the ocean knowledge that we learned in our college to the wild audience. And during the colloquium, as you can see, we'll collaborate in the creative workspace that you can find in the Padlet in that link. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. And after the colloquium, we will do the podcast. So we will looking forward for you as well to join us on our social media accounts. As you can see here, yeah, it's one click away, so you can join now. And we will take part also, hopefully, to the ocean literacy, as we have been starting this. And we are still in the early stage, so more feedback and more dialogues are looking forward to everyone in this room and the virtual space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mutia. And you know, they will look at us during the whole week, and they will provide us a feedback at the end of the week, just before the closing. They will just give us the feedback of what they think about the way we are exchanging and about the colloquium. So then the week at a glance, you have the programs. There are still some changes. We will update the website, and you see we have 9 sessions. And during the 9th session, the keywords of the presentation, so you can see what we will talking about just at a glance. So we'll talk about the past, the future, feedback, life, modeling, water quality, services. So it's all the keywords that we have in the talks. We will have panel. I will not go into the details, but today we will have a panel, Science to Policy, one citizen science on Wednesday, diversity and equity on Thursday, and on Friday, interaction with the media. We will have the second part of the mentoring tomorrow, so pay attention that it's a kind of speed dating. It will not be this building, it will be in the HEC building. The link to the building is in the online program, but if you want, we can meet here at the entrance and go all together, the one who wants to go to the mentoring, to the HEC building if you want. So just after the morning session. Okay, there will be also a Copernicus training organized during 2 lunch. If you are interested during 2 lunch time, you can join, but you need to register if you want to have sandwiches. And I'm almost done. Just the GOWN code of conduct. So this conference is submitted to the GOWN code of conduct. This code of conduct is available on the website, but also on the Padlets. And specifically, I would like to raise your attention to this part. So we as organizer, we will take some photograph, but that will be used to document and to promote the meeting and the scientific issue of the meeting. All the meeting participants, if they want to have some photograph where people are recognizable, they have to ask the authorization of these people if they want to make it public. After the colloquium, we will have the Zoom will be recorded and will be made available only to the colloquium participant. You give your consent to that. The Padlet will remain available and the talk will be available on the colloquium drive. For those who decline, your talk will be removed and the part of the recording will be removed as well. Okay, so just general information. Please check the program updates. Do not forget to put your presentation on the drive before the start of the session, and the session assistant will upload the presentation for you. Poster will be displayed during the whole week. Do not forget to vote for the Jack Nihul Poster Award. Final things, we will have a special issue. We have some agreement with biogeosciences to have a special issue there. We have to deliver to them a list of potential contributions for the end of June. Then we'll have the final approval from Biogeoscience, and September 30th, the special issue will be open. Okay? We thank our sponsors. Okay, so you see here the list, and we are very grateful to them. They allow us to invite people and to invite young scientists. And the last thing that I have to do, which is quite challenging as well, is to introduce our first keynote speaker, Hans Otto Portner, that I thank you very much for being here. I know that your schedule is very tight and you have an IPCC meeting just after, so we are very grateful that you are here. And so I will try in a few words to summarize your parcours. Very difficult. So you obtain a PhD in zoology from the University of Münster and Düsseldorf. Then you have an Eisenberg fellowship to go to Canada and to go also to New Mexico. You have been the main authors or co-authors of many papers in Science, in Nature, and you have been the coordinating lead author of IPCC RF5 reports. And so your field of research is really the impact of climate warming, ocean acidification, and hypoxia on marine animals and ecosystem as concerned the ecological, physiological, and biomolecular aspects. And so today you will speak about questions and approaches around ocean oxygen, a physiologist's view. Thanks so much.
I don't know, maybe the experts need to have. Okay, let's try. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, please. Yeah, thank you for sorting that out. So thanks a lot for your kind introduction, Marie-Laure, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here and to speak to you. And it's a very unusual feeling not had for the last 2 years or so to be and speak to a relatively large room of people. But it seems we are moving back to normality. And I'm also impressed with the complexity and the multifaceted approaches to this meeting. And I think ocean oxygen is really a very important topic in terms of what it means for ocean life and what it means for the globe as a whole. And I will try to bring up some items that a physiologist's brain can come up with when thinking about this topic. I will be putting this into the context of the different reports that we have been producing during the cycle. So picking elements from this and that, and that's the 1.5 report, the ocean, and the cryosphere report especially, but we also have a report on climate change and land, and to mention and emphasize all of this coming together in a way in the Working Group 2 report on climate impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And I would also like to mention a workshop report, which actually was very innovative, and it's a very recent one still, because it was the first official collaboration between the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the Biodiversity Panel, IPBES, where we looked at the relationship between biodiversity and climate change. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because I think it's important to study these items from a holistic view, to look at how the components of the global system are interacting, and to give each component its specific position. So what we were looking at in the Working Group 2 report is then actually developing this holistic view, looking at the current imbalances, human and the relationship between climate, human society, and then for the first time in IPCC history, emphasizing ecosystems, including biodiversity more in this holistic view. Human society are certainly the reason and the cause of current imbalances through greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change being caused has impacts feeding back on human society, but also having impacts on ecosystem, including biodiversity. All of this sounds like a déjà vu, but putting this into a holistic picture was actually sending a message to governments and government delegations. And then certainly there's a direct impact of human society on ecosystems, but there are also positive interactions. Human society adapts and mitigates under climate change. It can certainly also undergo the risk of maladaptation. And ecosystems, including biodiversity, can also adapt to and also contribute to mitigation. And humans have the choice to conserve and restore ecosystems, because ecosystems are an important element in terms of provisioning ecosystem services and supporting livelihoods. If we would be going into a future where actually we would strengthen these positive interactions and stabilizing climate, limiting global warming, and strengthening the adaptation and mitigation side for both aspects, moving into the respective transitions and system transitions, the transformation that we talk about it as an overarching term. And this is something that is where we see the current challenges and why we see a huge implementation gap. It seems to be difficult to move in that direction. There are enablers to be considered: governance, finance, knowledge and capacity, catalyzing conditions, and technologies. And we have developed an overarching concept, or enriched an overarching concept that was there already in the AR5 called climate resilient development, looking at the interactions between human health and well-being, equity and justice, and combining it with ecosystem health and using planetary health as an overarching concept. So this is what the world should be striving for, but we are still living in the period of imbalances. And this is what this means for the ocean. We see an increase in ocean heat. Oceans are warming. We see an increase in global mean sea surface temperature. We see an increase in marine heat wave days, and all of this depends on the scenarios that we are actually following. And we've been comparing the very high ambitious mitigation scenario, RCP 2.6. It's not the one that is with the highest ambition level, but it currently seems to be one that possibly can still be achieved, and comparing this to a high emission scenario, which was previously the business as usual scenario, which is it no longer is, but it's still within the range of possibilities. At the same time, the projections are that the decline in ocean oxygen on average that we are currently seeing will be progressing and may be progressing, as well as, depending on the scenario, the change in surface pH indicating ocean acidification. So these are the changes that we are looking at. But certainly when we look at different ecosystems and biodiversity in different ocean areas, we have to consider that we are looking at a background variability that is important here, and that is important for the warming trend, where we have very different ocean areas in terms of mean temperatures, but then this picture blurs if we consider the different temperature ranges that are valid in those areas, and it seems temperature variability is especially high in the Northern Hemisphere. Variability is also to be considered in the context of ocean acidification, and this is already tied to oxygen, because in those areas where oxygen is low, normally we also have elevated CO2 levels, so these drivers change concomitantly. And the variability on ocean oxygen is indicated here, especially for the oxygen minimum zones, where we see an expansion of, and have seen an expansion of, oxygen minimum zones in terms of the shallowing of highly oxygenated surface waters and the expansion of low oxygen areas in midwater bodies in the eastern tropical North Atlantic, and even more so in the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean. And certainly this connects with variability in light, nutrients, and food. And this is quite a complex picture that needs to be considered if you want to really get a precise image, projection of what will be happening for ocean life. And then by Breitbrook et al., we have this important paper that looked back on the oxygen issues more closely in science, where we see the expansion of oxygen hypoxic minimum areas linked to the oxygen minimum zones, especially in the close to the upwelling areas. And we also see the development of ocean hypoxic areas, and these areas are expanding due to human influence. Now we have a full complexity of environmental changes that we need to consider in this picture. But can we then really, based on that, explain what's happening in the ocean? So let's look at this slide. This is a projection of what temperature would be doing. Warming and velocity causing shifts, latitudinal shifts in biodiversity. There is an impoverishment of biodiversity in the low latitudes. Some areas, including the biodiversity hotspots, are especially affected, and the response depends on the scenario, depends on the degree of global warming. But is this the full picture? Do we have to include a role for oxygen in these considerations? There's not only a shift in biogeography, but there's also a shift in species interactions and in community composition. And what we are currently seeing is already disconcerting. Biodiversity species are losing habitat. And we see this biodiversity valley here building up in the low latitudes, where from the black line to the blue line to the brownish line, we see the current patterns as they have evolved over the year. So there's a biodiversity loss caused by the warming trend, definitely. And again, the question is, did oxygen ocean, or does ocean oxygen play a role here? So what we actually still need to be doing, and that's a huge task for physiologists, I think, we need to explain the temperature-dependent marine biodiversity across latitudes, including also in the Antarctic, and or polar areas in general. And what is really lacking is a mechanism-based understanding of biodiversity distribution. If we look in the past into Earth's history and where this may have already played out during Earth's history, during, unfortunately, one of the mass extinction events, how actually biodiversity shifts would have mirrored, and how the current picture would actually have similarities with the past picture. Let's have a look at this picture where during the Permian-Triassic, there was a loss of tropical habitat. And this tropical habitat was lost for biodiversity on land, where species would be moving, and also in the ocean. The terrestrial biological changes, it seems, were driven by the ambient heat, and the ocean biological changes, there's still a discussion what has been driving this. Was it just heat? Was hypoxia, anoxia involved? Was ocean acidification involved? And the current hypothesis is that there may have been a combination of heat and oxygen deficiency causing the extinction events. So there is really the need for searching for unifying principles that are valid across organism realms. And we've tried to do this during the preparation for the chapter in AR5 and trying to bring the information, the marine information together for what we know about the thermal tolerance of ocean organisms and how that relates to ambient extremes. And the low 40s are certainly the highest temperatures known for certain ocean or marine areas, coastal areas. And what you see is that for multicellular plants and animals, we have the lowest upper temperature tolerances. Some unicellular organisms, microalgae, are pretty close. And then for the other groups, for many of those, it goes much higher. And it seems we were developing the idea that this could be an evolutionary background or represent a brick wall for the respective groups. And this is a piece of information that actually should be considered and included into efforts where people think about manipulating the genome of organisms and thinking about being able to shift the temperature limits and tolerance limits to upper temperature that way, including terrestrial organisms and including crops where these ideas are around, but not considering that there may be an evolutionary limit to those efforts. And a hypothesis that came up was that it could be connected to the complexity, simply counting the number of compartments in operation in these organisms, that there might be actually a relationship between the upper temperature limit for growth and performance and the level of complexity of the organisms, but not really having a full understanding yet. But what the hypothesis is then that higher complex organisms will become extinct in the warmest ocean area. There's nobody to follow behind. And such projections relate to observed distribution patterns during warming periods in Earth's history. And actually, we can now say, based on the recent insights, that this is also emerging for current biodiversity, concerning mostly animals. So searching for unifying principles, what can we say? There have been some papers around saying, yes, impacts of hypoxic events surpass those of future ocean warming and acidification. That is certainly clear. If oxygen gets low enough, higher life that depends on oxygen, on breathing oxygen, aerobic metabolism is certainly most severely affected. But does such a comparison actually take us to the final answers? And then there is some paleo analysis where actually marine clade sensitivities to climate change were similar during past evolutionary crises compared to the present day. And that is also some insight that is quite important in this context. And this is then led to the hypothesis that the synergistic interaction between warming and hypoxia has the greatest potency as a proximate driver of extinction. But the next step would be to develop an integrative analysis for understanding paleo and present vulnerabilities more comprehensively. If we just look at oxygen, we see the projection that on average the oxygen goes down, but certainly that the regional specificity needs to be considered. And then we see patterns depending on the different levels of oxygen, where certain groups, invertebrates group here and vertebrates show to be very vulnerable, whereas others, especially the unicells and the smaller eukaryotes, are less sensitive and can live in lower oxygen tensions. And there's this magic threshold of 60 micromoles per liter, where in cool midwater oxygen minimum zones, we see a benefit for small animals compared to large animals in terms of their critical oxygen tension. So there's a limiting oxygen level below which the larger animals would be excluded. And there are some physiological principles to be considered that many of us who have a longer history in the field have been working on over time. So how do animals respond to declining oxygen? The critical threshold is being reached, and how can we define the transition between aerobic and anaerobic metabolism? This was a nice start, but it actually doesn't really connect to temperature very well to begin with. But then there were some recent findings, more recent findings, where actually people looked at the change in the critical oxygen level in relation to temperature and compared it with respiration. So we see this typical exponential rise in oxygen consumption value that is then leaving this exponential phase at low and high temperatures. And we see a temperature-dependent shift in critical oxygen tension, where the critical oxygen tension is actually reaching air saturation. So that emphasized that there may be a link between oxygen supply and temperature, some optimization of oxygen supply systems with respect to the ambient temperature regime. And then as another unifying principle, there seems to be the principle of temperature-dependent performance curve, which is not only valid for animals, but for plants, for microphytes and so forth. So it seems to be a unifying principle that organisms have only a certain level of energy available to them within a restricted temperature range, describing their performance, and that this performance curve could be influenced by other drivers like CO2 or hypoxia. So there's a dynamic in the relationship between temperature-dependent performance and other ambient stresses. And for animals, this was an early finding that kind of started the story on oxygen-limited thermal tolerance, as it was called back then. It's still a nice data set to illustrate that actually, yes, there is an optimization of oxygen supply visible in oxygen content in body fluids in relation to temperature. And there are different ranges that could be assigned to them, an optimum and then a Payer's range where things go down, moving into a pessimum range. And when oxygen levels get really low in the body fluids, you see an increase in anaerobic metabolites, like indicated here by succinate. And this is also visible in the cardiocirculatory performance. And we have some non-invasive NMR technologies used here in order to illustrate the different transition changes, leading to definitions like Payer's temperature, onset of hypoxemia, or critical temperature, onset of anaerobic metabolism and reduction, but not a complete loss of aerobic scope. So the hypothesis that emerged from that was the one on onset oxygen and capacity limited thermal tolerance, oxygen contributing to set the performance level of an organism, certainly also linking to the capacity of endogenous mechanisms. And here you see the different transition points defined in a more general term, and all of these constraints happening before actually temperature becomes really damaging, and the temperature dependent performance curve defining really the fitness measures like growth, specific dynamic action, response to intake of food, exercise, behaviors, immune capacity, and reproduction. And then beyond, you move into a progressive time limitation of thermal tolerance. A limited capacity to tolerate extremes comes with a limited time to tolerate those extremes. So there is a range of active tolerance and there is a passive range, and these would need to be known for species. And you can see and understand when you want to do this and scale it up to ecosystem and biodiversity, what an effort this is and could be. But these principles give access to understanding what's happening in terms of biogeography shifts, here in relation to latitude, where on the warm side, there's a constraint in distribution and a widening and expansion of distribution on the cold side, and a shift in the focal area of a species. But it also gives access to understanding the interaction between these performance curves, that species can only coexist where their performance curves overlap. And if there is a response to drivers like hypoxia and ocean acidification, these coexistence ranges could become smaller or wider, or the performance relationship would change in terms of their competitiveness. So this gives access to relatively straightforward ecological principles. There are just relatively few examples where this has been done. Now, we have done this and joined forces with Curtis Deutsch and Brett Seibel, and looking at what this means for temperature-dependent distribution. Doing it for Atlantic cod. And this is a distribution limit to the south. And we were developing a metabolic index, in a way, routine aerobic metabolic scope that might be related to this. And you see is a southern distribution limit is relating to this metabolic index. And you can also do this in seasonal terms, in terms of what happens during summer on the eastern and western side of the Atlantic. But you can also generalize this more, and that's what Curtis then did with the data, looking at how ambient hypoxia would actually constrain aerobic performance and constrain with the implications for the geographical distribution and the well-being of species. And you see there is a global mean decrease by about 20% in that index, and that the changes are strongest in the Pacific, which is certainly the most oxygen poor of the ocean, and at northern high latitudes in the North Pacific, especially there's a 40% depression of the metabolic index, with implications for a compression of distribution range, compression of body, reduction of body size, with impacts and consequences for diversity. Again, reaching a high complexity level where it's not so easy to grapple with the details for any species. And in their most recent effort, they came in a way back to this and tried to connect the biodiversity patterns with extinction patterns. And linking it again to temperature, and linking it also to the impact of hypoxia, and emphasizing the results of the earlier study and connecting to the biodiversity pattern, where we have this biodiversity maximum traditionally in the low latitudes, where actually with the warming, we see an extirpation of species in those low latitudes. But in terms of them moving to higher latitudes, And those higher latitude species sort of hitting the wall because there's nowhere to go and a limited capacity to adapt that there is, and their projection is there is a higher risk of extinction for the higher latitude species. So you see, and again, they did this in terms of comparing high emissions and low emissions scenarios, clearly indicating that progressive climate change means a risk to ocean biodiversity, and that the interaction between the different drivers plays a key role. And here you see how the current biodiversity dip in the low latitudes is represented. So all of this tells us, yes, there are changes happening. These changes should be limited. Climate policies and biodiversity policies should take these challenges into account. And we summarized this at the end of our working group 2 report and said the science is clear for ocean, land, and human society. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future for biology, for ecological systems and human societies on this planet. And this report also discusses solutions and offers them to the world, and we can only hope that policy makers will take them up. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That's a very nice introduction to the Okay, any question? So either online or here on the room. So is there any question? Yeah, one here.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I was just curious. There was you were showing this map from the work from Curtis Deutsch and Europe of this metabolic map, and there was in the North Atlantic. It was basically wide. Is that related with this cold blob that they're always describing in the North Atlantic? That usually in the global ocean is warming, but in the North Atlantic it's always observed in increasing, like in temperature.
Yeah, that's right. There's a cold area
blob, yeah.
that is emphasized also with progressive warming.
Thank you. Other question? Yeah, one at the back. Yeah. So if there is a question at distance, just raise your hand. Sorry.
Thank you very much for a wonderful talk, Hans. Yeah, I have a question about the 41 degrees Celsius sea surface temperature limit that you're talking about as kind of the limit for complex organisms. And I wonder
Can you speak more slowly? It's hard to understand.
The 41 degrees Celsius sea surface temperature limit as kind of an upper thermal limit for complex organisms. I wonder if you think that there's some kind of underlying physiological limit to that, or simply, you know, there's not that much ocean that presents those types of conditions. And so organisms don't adapt to conditions that are not as common.
Yeah, thank you. That is certainly a valid question. That's a relatively rough comparison. These warmest places refer to shallow water environments, lagoons or so, where temperatures could go and reach these values. That is true, but the impacts, the constraints are setting in earlier, and these limits are species specific. It was just at the time an interesting comparison to make that actually, and that is reflected then in the biodiversity data, that the highly complex organisms are reaching their thermal limits first before the other groups are reaching them.
Thank you. So thank you once again for the talk.
Thank you.
So now we move to the first session, so science to policy and also ecosystem services. And I will give the chair to Kirsten Nielsen, who will start to chat.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm very proud to be here in this place and also on behalf of IOC. And we will start now with the first keynote from this session. And this is introduced by the Executive Secretary of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin, an oceanographer, marine engineer, meteorologist, and climatologist. And he's involved since the 1980s in various capacities in the UN. And now his work is really focusing on creating a solid scientific foundation for managing the ocean sustainable. And this is also totally in line with what Hans Otto just presented, and really in the framework of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainability. And so the title as well of this talk is Ocean Science for Sustainability, and I pass the word to Vladimir.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. I hope you hear me, and I understand that you also see me. So, it is, I think, quite relevant for me to give this talk after Hans Otto, because I think he presented to you the current understanding in ocean science. But the biggest question is what we will do about this. And I think this is where the power of the United Nations comes in. And I know that I have to say next slide. So, I would like to say that the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO will then pronounce the abbreviation in the future. IOC is a part of UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And, I would like simply quote something which is really relevant now. So a quote from the UNESCO Constitution: "Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed." So, let's move forward. I would like to say that United Nations is taken very seriously. Next slide. What is happening in the world, and also what is happening in the ocean. On the next slide that I hope you will see, but because I don't, it is not moving for me. So you will see that 26 organizations of the United Nations system are in various elements of the ocean. So if there is any possibility to have feedback from the organizers to see for me to understand what you see, because I see only the second slide focused on UNESCO. So the presentation is not moving forward. So but I would like to say that in principle, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO is the home of ocean science in the United Nations system. But there are 26 organizations that are actually doing various jobs in the ocean, including UNESCO itself. So let's move to the next slide, please. So I would like to present to you IOC. And IOC is focused on several important issues that directly relate to what Hans Otto was presenting. We have to achieve healthy ocean, also ecosystem services, that I think what is under big threat. And for that, we have to develop, and also we have to use and develop different warning services, for example, for tsunamis. This all is happening in the conditions of climate change, and of course we have to live in the world that is focused also on economy. And so with that, there are no direct solutions for this. And because of that, IOC is working with its 150 member states and is developing conditions for ocean research, observations, data management, development of various warning systems, real-time services, and also assessments, contributing, for example, to the assessments that Hans Otto presented. This all should result in better management of the ocean. So let's move forward. Next slide, please. And I would like to show to you how United Nations is positioning itself. Well, this is all called 2030 agenda. And for the first time in history of humankind, there is a sustainable development goal in the ocean, goal number 14. So this agenda was adopted by United Nations system in the General Assembly in 2015. It was actually at that very General Assembly that the first global assessment of the state of the ocean by United Nations that was presented. And basically it's a 1,000-page document. But if I summarize what is written there in one phrase, the phrase is humankind is running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. This also relates to deoxygenation. Basically, my talk to you would be to pick up where Hans Otto left and see what we can do to make sure that there is a possibility to address ocean acidification, oxygen deoxygenation, and many other stressors in the way. But what is really important to understand that sustainable development is very dependent on the state of the ocean. And of course, in order to address this, we need to develop an agenda which is ocean science intensive. So, but the phrase that we are running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably can be explained if we use the next slide. Next slide, please. So you will see on the next slide different ways of how we can manage the ocean. You know, I don't like actually the word managing the ocean because it's kind of, you know, it's really a kind of dry. But in principle, you know, we have approaches to live with the ocean that are focused on coastal zone management, on establishing of maritime special plans in the world, establishing marine protected areas, learning and managing large marine ecosystems, focusing on fisheries and aquaculture. Also, adaptation, mitigation, climate change is also a way of managing the ocean in the domain of ocean and climate nexus. So, and there are many other ways of managing the ocean. But you know that this is basically the most important point, that from science we need to move to actions, and actions will have to be organized. And there are different ways already, different guidelines, and also governments are more and more engaged in different ways of managing the ocean. So let's now look at the next slide. This is a presentation of Sustainable Development Goal 14. And the slide, next slide, please. And thank you, that's it. Speaks about 10 targets. You know, we speak about pollution. The previous slide, please. Sorry, I was a bit unclear. The previous slide, please, if possible. So we speak about 10 targets, and these targets are focusing on the pollution, on the health of ecosystems, of various ways of protecting and conserving different zones. Also, there are 2 targets that are focusing on ocean science and ocean acidification. So there is no target on ocean deoxygenation. So, but you know, it's very important to realize this is, of course, not just a bureaucratic exercise, but if we speak about indicators, what we do in the ocean, don't need to embrace the totality of what we need to be doing this. These are just indicators, but we learn how to report about those indicators in the world. So, for example, we have moved from the indicators that were just conceptually developing to the indicators of the tier 2 that are now conceptually clear. But you know, the world is not ready to really report on the state of the ocean, but we are moving there. So deoxygenation is very important. And this takes us to the next slide, please. So actually, Marie-Laure spoke about the Euro-Oceans conference that took place in 2011. And of course, it was this colloquium in 2014 that really engaged everyone in trying to organize yourselves. So that organization took place in San Francisco. I think it was at AGU meeting. And after that, IUC considered this and established the Global Ocean Observing, the GONE working group. So I think there were several important publications. You know, when I the first time in my life I saw that publication in Science with the map, I really felt that, you know, the lack of oxygen zones off the coast of China and of some other coasts was mostly related not to the lack of zones, but to the lack of observations. I think it's very important to really understand what we can really observe in relation to the ocean oxygen, and there are also, this is actually an essential ocean variable. So, and let's move to the next slide. So we need with that, I think, to inform the world. about what's happening with the ocean oxygen and also ocean acidification. So there was after the science paper, there was also fantastic summary for policymakers that was, I think, really catching the attention of decision makers, because it was called "The Ocean is Losing Its Breath." And also I remember a fantastic publication on acidification that was saying that oxygen is becoming hot, sour, and breathless. It made its effect, I think, on the decision makers. Next slide, please. So let's move now to the next state of my presentation. Very briefly, I would like to say, next slide, please. So I would like to present to you various frameworks that have a bearing on the ocean in the United Nations system. I spoke about Sustainable Development Agenda. There is now a new law on biodiversity beyond areas of national jurisdiction. There is a convention on climate, biodiversity, various conventions on fisheries, convention on small island developing states. So they are all science, ocean science intensive. But there are only two conventions that speak about the role of ocean science and the need to have rules for the ocean science. But there is no convention on ocean science. And let's look to the next slide, please. The next slide shows the consequences of a lack of a convention that will be supporting the need to have sustainable ocean science itself. So when we speak about sustainability of ocean networks and meteorological networks, you will see the dramatic difference in the security. So in the ocean, we unfortunately are not secure with what we do. So we need to change that. Next slide, please. We have to report on the state of the ocean. So, and we report to United Nations, engage governments. So the two reports that IUC published in 2017 and 2020, and our convener, Kirsten Isnze, was actually very instrumental in the work on this report, publishing this report. Now we can report very convincingly to the world. And I have to say that one key indicator is how much money is spent in percentage mode on ocean science in percentage of the overall expenditure on science. Currently, it's 1.7%. It is not sufficient for the 70% of the area of the planet. But nevertheless, we inform the governments what is happening. Next slide, please. And also what is important is that, unfortunately, the world is totally unequal when it comes to capacity of ocean science. So this is a slide from the report of 2017. It shows areas of countries that are proportionate to the number of publications in the English language. So what I think is the striking feature of this map, there is no Africa there. There is also some South Africa there. So we wanted to change that. Yes, indeed. Next slide would be showing how we would like to change that. We approached the United Nations. We would like, next slide, please. And we propose to them, we being IUC and the member states of IUC, to conduct a decade of ocean science. And this is, if the decade is accepted, the idea, then it means that United Nations and 193 governments are behind the need to have oceans science developed and sustainable. So we were successful. And not only we had international decade, but also United Nations decade of ocean science. Next slide, please. And then in 2017, that was proclaimed, and we started to work with the global community, thousands of people, hundreds of organizations, dozens of countries. And then, like in the case of IOC, we have our goals and have a means to achieving them. The implementation plan, we set 7 qualities of the ocean, starting from clean and finishing with inspiring and engaging. It's very important that inspiring and engaging is not only about the ocean, but also about us people and our relations with the ocean. But the work has to be organized in 10 domains. 5 of these domains: pollutants, ecosystems, food from the ocean, ocean economy, climate nexus, and also risks to some extent, would be the thematic domains. We need to develop observing system, ocean representation an avenue for the development of ocean science as it is now. Then we moved forward. Next slide, please. On inviting the community to work in that direction. 3 calls for actions have issued. And the result of the first call, we have more than 30 programs and fantastic set of activities. I would like to say that this is now, the idea of the decade gave impetus and also momentum to ocean science, and also transformation of ocean science from just theoretic studies, which are very important, but we have to convert them to the help of sustainability. So I think this is the, I think we are experiencing renaissance in ocean science. But I'd like also to say, next slide, please, that there was a very successful application of the oxygen community. Next slide, please. To the decade in the result of the first call, and we have now in the result the program that is called GOOD, and I know that Andrei is going to present. Next slide, please. Present this this program to you. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but you know, the move forward is from theoretical studies to the ability to synthesize the information and already take actions. So actually, I would like to say now that despite, you know, actually I in the Lear Symposium, and it was in the 80s. Then I was developing my work in dynamical oceanography. But at the time, the understanding was kind of technocratic of what the ocean science is. The science in the decade is indeed that technological, mathematical, you know, physical, biogeochemical science, biological science. This is only the type of science, kind of natural science. This is also very much a human science. So because we have an early career ocean professionals network under the decade, there is a special program on empowering women to lead the decade. I'm particularly touched by the fact that we have the decade of ocean empathy. So this is a totally new type of science. So this is a science that brings together the fundamentals and not the societal element. Next slide, please. So I invite you to participate in the decade. So in the decade, we have also some, I think, assistance to thinking, to co-designing. We will monitor and evaluate what is going to happen with the ocean science. We focus on technology. We definitely need to communicate successfully in ocean science. For that, we have a Generation Ocean campaign that should really change the people's attention to the ocean and help them to understand that they're part of the Earth system, of which the ocean is the dominant ecosystem. Data coordination, work with the private sector, expert roster, and you know, on the lower part you will see the community image. So that is the Decade Forum. This is the forum of communities of practice when people come together and co-design what they would like to do. So we created some movement in the programs, also create facilities to co-design the science further. So opportunities. Next slide, please. With the decision of United Nations to proclaim the decade, with the energy that is now in the decade, we have to also imagine the future. And this was actually very instrumental for us to participate and also to learn more from the deliberations of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. That high-level panel actually was informed by the science we participated in as experts there. And apparently there is a possibility by managing the ocean on the basis of better data, on the basis of sustainable plans, if we are able to curb the pollution from the land and also change actually the economy of the ocean activities, and there are fantastic opportunities in generation of sustainable ocean economy, which is much more, which is richer, which is much more equitable, enriching not only the rich people, but also in helping people to live better, contribute to the science, to the climate solutions, generate more own energy, generate more food. So this brings me to the last slide of my presentation. Next slide, please. I would like to say that with the decade, we have now more oxygen in what we do in the ocean. We have fresh breath for the ocean science, and this is happening on the basis of science, technology, economy, and very importantly, ethics in the spirit of co-design. And with that, it will be very possible for us to really help this world to live better in more harmony with the ocean. Thank you very much for your attention. I know I ran out of time. I think it is very important to connect the science and we can do with the help of science in terms of making our lives better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. I think this was a very in the audience or online. Okay. Ah, yes, there. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, thank you for your talk. I have what is kind of a small technical question. From your slide on the sustainable development goals, I noticed that the goals 14 A, B, C had no particular kind of year in mind for which goals should be hit. And I was wondering, like, what is the difference between these tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 goals when it comes to defining the UN sustainable agenda? And how does that play out when it comes to actually allotting infrastructure or financial resources towards achieving those goals?
So let's look, you know, we have to say that as they were adopted by the United Nations, you know, we have to speak to governments and mostly negotiators when you adopt the formation of the targets. And indeed, when it comes to 14.3, there is no target date. But you know, when it comes to, for example, targets 14.1, that will be curbing pollution. So there was already some anticipation that big progress can be achieved by certain date. So I have to say that right now, United Nations is very seriously considering the progress in the Sustainable Development Goal 14, looking at indicators, and we have to say we are moving forward, but unfortunately, none of the targets have been achieved. So I think when it comes to ocean acidification target, when it was designed, it was already clear that we have to somehow find ways of adapting and mitigating the impacts on the basis of science that also required a certain time for development. I think for me, that was the reason why 14.3 doesn't have any deadline. When it comes to targets 14.8, 14.B and C, I have to say that these targets are also quite new for the United Nations system, because you know, to report on the state of science is very, very difficult, so and also I want to say that the current indicator is I think useful for us to be more competitive among all other sciences. But I would like to say that we even don't know how much money is really needed to be efficiently invested in ocean science. So we're working on this by bringing together economy and also scientific considerations. So this is basically still a work in progress. And I think after the United Nations conference on the ocean in Lisbon at the end of June, we will be probably in better position to see where we are. So basically, summarizing, the response is that the indicators reflect the state of understanding of potential progress in this area and expectations for this progress. That was the spirit of the discussions there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir, also for this answer. And I think we have to now move to the next speaker. And I'm also very happy to welcome Professor Andreas Oschlies, co-chair of GON and also co-lead of the Global Ocean Oxygen Decade. He's the Earth System Modeler at Geom Kiel, and I hand over to you. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Kirsten. Thank you, Vladimir, for introducing good already, and thank you, Hans, for setting the scientific scene and the IPCC and IP-BEST framework. I want to present to you one program of the United Nations Ocean Decade for ocean science for sustainable development. So that's really targeting sustainable development. We are scientists, so it's our role to fill this with science, also to help to set better indicators and a better framework to put definite, delivery targets for the sustainability goals, this goal 14. And I think that's where we are here to move this forward and really to be creative, to find clear, indicators, targets, also the amount of funding that is needed to reach these or to study these. And okay, thank you very much. So the Global Ocean Oxygen Decade, it's a program run by Marie-Laure. Kirsten Isensee is really keeping everything together, always reminding us of deadlines and things, emails be lost. Yes, that was me. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Just a moment. So this is really the figure you saw already. So that's from Denise's paper, where we set the scene of what was known at that time. And we see a number of bluish areas in the open ocean, red dots. And this is very impressive. So these are all low oxygen environments. But scientifically, we have to really look a little bit deep. Every red dot means one observation of a low oxygen system environment. It could be 1 day or 1 hour, one tidal period. It could be 10 years. This is not on this map. And also on this map are points usually where people walk around with their mobile phones and see the effects of dead oxygen, of low oxygen environments. And this is scientifically questionable. It might be heavily biased by the information we have. And this is not fully objective. There are many areas where nobody walks with a mobile phone on the beach. And this is, well, also in the historical perspective, a change of behavior, change of technology, which might map onto this, this figure. But while we see there are effects of low oxygen environments, and we know, well, when you can't breathe, nothing else matters. I think the first occurrence of this was in the Canadian Health Lung Association. Maybe there are earlier ones, but it also applies to fish, to all higher life in the ocean. A more aimed at a more objective analysis. That's the Schmidtko et al. Paper for the open ocean. So there, the result of an analysis of historical data still with huge data gaps and interpolation issues, extrapolation issues in space and in time. The result was, the finding was about 2% of the ocean oxygen inventory was lost over 5 decades only. So this is a dramatic decline. And if you extrapolate that in 2,500 years, no oxygen would be left in the ocean. So that's about the speed we think that might have, or even faster than in past extinction events. And the question is this real? Can we support it with more data? The models today cannot support this. So we have a discrepancy, a factor 2 to 3 between current state-of-the-art models and this observational estimate. So there's certainly scientific questions that we all here have to help to answer and to resolve to get a better, full scientific understanding. Where we do come from is the Global Ocean Oxygen Network, GON, and that was funded a little after the last Liège conference. So I think that was instrumental here. We all came together, and Denise and all, they moved this forward and created, were the first co-chairs of this group. And so this really took off. And so I'm curious to see what will happen in 2 years' time. This was funded in 2016. So up to us, up to you to move things forward again. Good program. So from gone to good, and good is the UN Decade program with Marie-Laure and myself currently as co-chairs. But this is all of us. Right now, we don't have any funding. It's just a framework that offers opportunities, and we have to fill it with life. So what do we do there? We have objectives. The first objective is to provide knowledge and best practices. So this is science. What are best practices to measure oxygen, to report data, metadata? What do we need to really make this comparison, have this global map with the red dots, and put that on a firm scientific framework to address the target 14 in a perfect way. So there are a lot of work needs to be done to harmonize all our efforts and well, capacity building to allow everybody to contribute to this more efficiently. And then from this base data, the drivers and impacts of ocean deoxygenation. So this is what society needs, also what marine ecosystems need. And well, where mitigation is not possible, to provide appropriate adaptation measures. So that's the second best choice. We have to ensure the provision of ecosystem services important to society, and also address the possible feedbacks or likely feedbacks on the climate system by the production of potent greenhouse gases in oxygen minimum zones and a disturbance of biogeochemical cycles. And altogether, we want to minimize the impact of ocean deoxygenation on economy. So that's again to allow societies to develop in a sustainable way. And many of us, many of the world population, we all in the end depend on ocean life. The activities we have planned and we all together have to fill with content, with life, with science, is identifying, understanding the threats. So these are physiological impacts. Hans showed a couple of these for different species, different ecosystems. What really are the guardrails? Are there limits in oxygen concentration together with other multiple stresses? To also develop indicators that societies, communities, policymakers can use. So water quality indicators, oxygen levels, what units do we use? Do we relate to temperature or not? Saturation versus concentration, many things we have to sort out and inform decision makers and societies. Also think of measurement ways that are low cost and can be done everywhere, reproducible. Then we have to look at the ecosystem services. So assessing and valuing these in order, again, to make societies aware of potential costs, risks, and changes, investments they will have to take. And all this in a world where we have not only deoxygenation, but other co-stressors affecting marine ecosystems. So we have to look at this comprehensive framework, not in isolation, but in collaboration with many other UN Decade programs as well. One activity is to identifying consequences, economic and societal consequences. That's needed to take society on board, make societies aware of the problem, the issue of deoxygenation and the possible impacts on their daily life. Understanding causes, attributing changes, and developing mitigation approaches. So that's, again, a fully scientific our work that we do, attributing and understanding. And this involves the base mapping and modeling. So really our database has to be the top quality, or at least traceable quality with appropriate flags, so that everybody can use this. Also bringing together all the oxygen information that is out there, mostly often in coastal communities who are not connected to global databases, use different measurement techniques and reporting schemes, metadata, and so on. And this involves, but the most important one, I think, to make sure that particularly in these coastal environments, we get the information that is needed and that we all need to connect this open ocean, coastal to society frame and have a smooth and comprehensive understanding of the feedbacks in the system. To do all that, we need you. We are a small group. We have just initiated and wrote the program and thought this is needed, and we all feel that it's needed. But we need the entire community, and it's so great to see you all here in this room and online. That it's really like a home of oxygen research, marine oxygen research, I think, and we are a very strong group, and it's great to get together after the pandemic and move things forward. So we have all responsibility to do this, and this involves sharing knowledge and data. So that's what we are trained as scientists, but sometimes not trained, because of course we have our individual career pathways, and we as a community have to ensure that intellectual properties are protected, that we do share information in a way as well. So that's another sustainability goal to do this. And this includes ensuring best scientific practices of ownership, but of transparency, sharing, reproducibility of data, of information. That's, I think, what we have to do. Last slide is what we do. We have a few ongoing activities. Despite so far very, very limited funding. So we have GONE seminar, and that's always an early career scientist and a later career scientist teaming up 20 minutes each. So if you want to present that in the world, in a framework open to the entire world community, let us know. Next seminars are coming up soon in June. And since yesterday, we have a Twitter good activity, so I'm trying to learn this, and please contribute to this whenever you can. We also had a first hackathon 2 weeks ago on data sharing, data-based development, and there will likely be another one in December. So keep your eyes open to these new initiatives that don't cost much money, but they cost your time, your initiative. But I think it's a win-win situation, and we have to create these win-win situations, low-cost win-win situations. That's the goal. And good news is something we will circulate very soon. And we have a new scientific officer, Paul Morris. He will help us. He just started Thursday. So now I'm really in the driving seat here, and we need your input for the good news to share it with the world. So let us know whatever you have there. Thank you for attention. Help to feel good with life and send out all the good news very soon. And I very much look forward to jointly developing the research and action on ocean deoxygenation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for this nice overview about the Global Ocean Oxygen Decade. And now there's a lot of pressure that we have to get the good news out on time. Are there any questions for Andreas? No questions? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Andreas. That's a really excellent initiative. I guess I have a couple of questions. One of them is something like this actually will require some financing, I think. And I'm thinking about databases, and I'm thinking about how those are managed. And I think that this is part of the good practices, I guess, objective as well, because from my perspective, it's a complete disaster. I mean, it's a mess. How do you access model results, for example, and how do you compare those to other model results, and how do you compare that to the data as it exists already in the databases? The whole thing is just all open. And I'm hoping that this good program will help to try to consolidate, but I don't think it's an easy problem.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's the key, I think, of our difficulties, and well as historical developments, of course, which make it understandable. We have, Véronique Casson and Marie Legault, they have already started a project within this program. That's the GODAT, Global Ocean Oxygen Atlas and Database. So that's one initiative. Still, we doesn't have any funding, but it is right now being reviewed whether it can join and get the approval by the UN decade. And I'm pretty sure it will. So then we have another framework that we still have to fill with funding. So we then have to go to national, international funding bodies, maybe foundations, but I think overall money is out there. So it's not billions, it's just very few millions we need. And it's a win-win situation. We can do that even at lower cost. Started that with a hackathon to bringing together people from different countries. Usually they don't have the full legitimacy to share the data. So we have to work on local governments to allow people to share oxygen data and temperature salinity, all the metadata we need as well. I think we can make progress, or we have to make progress that way as well, talking to each other, finding good ways, what are structures, quality control, flags that we need. And this GODAT, Global Oxygen Database, and us, I think that's an excellent construct. We soon, hopefully will very soon have to have there installed as a project and fill with life. And we will approach all of you via the good news, but otherwise to share your data and adhere to the protocols that we also will jointly have to agree upon to make best use of this. It involves coastal data and open ocean data. That's even more difficult than the historical World Ocean Atlas, so it was mainly open ocean. But here there's many national properties and sensitivities, of course, which we have to overcome. And I think the UN decade, that's really can help and will help, since most countries have signed up to this. And so we can use that as leverage to really them to deliver, buy into this win-win pool of shared information and shared data. That's my hope.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will also have a presentation actually about GODAT. I couldn't find exactly the time, but we will have about that, and there's some publication outside. So next is Lisa Levin, professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego in the US. And I'm very happy that she will today present on mainstreaming oxygen in international ocean management and conservation. And what's yours?
So I'm hoping today to talk to you about mainstreaming oxygen in ocean management and conservation. Let's see if we can get my slides up. And this idea really touches on many different arenas: climate, biodiversity, pollution, resources in the ocean, ocean conservation. You know, oxygen really affects all of these. So what I'd like to do today is give you some sense of first of awareness, how oxygen appears in the different global assessments that are written effectively to influence, or not to influence, but to inform policymakers about the science. And then I'll talk about some of the ways that we can operationalize responses to oxygen challenges in international policy. And then I'll talk about opportunities that we have in the different areas you see listed here. And I think both and Vladimir did a really nice introduction to some of the themes I want to talk about. And I'm going to start with the assessments. So the Second World Ocean Assessment, also known as the regular process, was released last year. And if we look at the executive summary, which these summaries are for policymakers and for the media. This is what gets the attention. Oxygen is mentioned 5 times. I think that's actually pretty good, that in the sense that deoxygenation is there 4 times, oxygen production is mentioned once, and even the Global Ocean Oxygen Network is mentioned in the summary. The problem with the World Ocean Assessment, I think, is that there has been very limited policy uptake of this document, even though it was written by hundreds of really well-informed scientists and contains a lot of information. So in contrast, if we look at the International Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and that summary for policymakers, there's one mention of ocean deoxygenation and or of oxygen at all, and it's in the context of eutrophication in coastal waters. So in this summary, oxygen is really viewed as a coastal phenomenon. While there has been great uptake by policymakers and media of this report, it doesn't feature oxygen very prominently. If we look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the last cycle of AR6 reports, 1.5 report on, or the report on global warming of 1.5 degrees mentions oxygen once in its summary for policymakers. The AR6 Working Group 1 summary for policymakers on the physical basis of climate change has actually 3 mentions of oxygen, as well as a figure, which is great. We would expect oxygen changes to appear, and they do. The Working Group 2 summary for policymakers on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability has 0 mentions of oxygen in the summary for policymakers, even though acidification and warming are mentioned many, many times. In the full report, there's 21 mentions of oxygen, often in terms of freshwater threats, which is really important. But I do want to point out it did not make it to the summary for policymakers. And then in the Working Group 3 report on mitigation of climate change, which is the most recently one, oxygen's mentioned once, and this is in the context of an effect of ocean fertilization enhancing oxygen consumption. And I want to just dive into the SROC, the Special Report on Ocean and Cryosphere and a Changing Planet, which did a great job with oxygen 27 times mentioned in the summary for policymakers, including this figure, which you've already seen today. And many of the people in this room actually worked really hard with their states to get that mention into the summary. And of course, Chapter 5 is the champion there with 127 mentions of oxygen in the chapter on changing ocean marine ecosystems and dependent communities. But it is worth noting, if we look at the synthetic figures that show confidence in changes in the climate response variables, that oxygen has a 1 dot across the board for all regions. That means it has the lowest confidence level. And this means we have a lot of work to do because the science isn't really there to understand and have confidence in changes in oxygen in any particular region. Another place to look for summaries that reach policymakers are the GASAMP reports, the Joint Group of Experts on the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection. These are sponsored by many UN agencies, and some of the recent reports, geoengineering has a lot of mentions of oxygen. The nitrogen inputs to the ocean report has a lot of mentions of oxygen. The global pollution trends doesn't speak of oxygen particularly, but it does have 1 mention of hypoxia. So we can ask, well, these are all assessments. Who's going to actually respond to what we've learned about oxygen and the needs for adaptation and mitigation and so on? And we have this alphabet soup of UN agencies managing the ocean by sector. And they do come together. They will be coming together at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon not very long from now. And if the UN Political Declaration Conference, which the first draft was given in last year, there are actually 2 mentions of oxygen. And probably more importantly, there are 8 themes guiding this conference. And one of them, theme 3, minimizing and addressing ocean acidification, deoxygenation, and ocean warming. And that really guarantees that oxygen will be on the stage in Lisbon. We can look at some other policy documents. For example, the International Seabed Authority is drafting environmental regulations for exploitation of deep sea minerals, and those regulations don't mention oxygen at all. They do refer to dissolved gas profiles and a description of the physicochemical environment as part of baseline data. And then, if we look at the UN Fish stocks agreement, which is very important in managing international fisheries. There's no mention of oxygen. Not surprising, it was written a long time ago and that wasn't really an important part of managing fisheries then. If we look the last official text of this does not mention oxygen, but I do want to call out the IUCN, which has proposed text changes that involve putting in ocean deoxygenation. And then the Convention on Biodiversity has the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, also doesn't mention oxygen, although, or deoxygenation, although climate change is mentioned once. Okay, if we go to the climate realm, we can look at the Paris Agreement. Not surprisingly, the Paris Agreement doesn't mention oxygen, but the initial intended nationally determined contributions tell us how nations are going to meet their requirements for the Paris, or commitments for the Paris Agreement. And Natalia Gallo, who's back there, did a really nice review and it points out that while warming is mentioned 70 times and acidification in the NDCs appear 14 times, deoxygenation was mentioned once by Mauritania. There have since been new NDC submissions, and I haven't had a chance to look at them all, but there is a nice synthesis report on these released late last year, and there is one mention of oxygen in that report in the context of deoxygenation. So at least it appears somewhere in the NDCs. We can look at how oxygen appears in the ocean and climate change dialogue submissions that were submitted to the 2020 SBSTA, also of the UNFCCC climate negotiations. And we find that 5% of the 49 submissions mention ocean deoxygenation. That's pretty good, but only 35% of party submissions. So it's much more mentioned by NGOs and IGOs. So here you can see the countries up there listed that actually did mention oxygen in their submissions. So the last COP, it was decided these dialogues would be annual events. And so there's a new round of submissions. There's 39 of them that have been submitted so far for the 2022 SBSTA in June. And similar number, 46% mention oxygen, although only 38% talk about oxygen loss or deoxygenation, and only 2 of the 11 party submissions. So what it means is that the delegates representing states and writing these things aren't necessarily very aware of oxygen, but all these other organizations that I've listed up there have mentioned oxygen in their submissions of Ocean Decade dialogue topics. And I love this picture because at COP25, I went to first talk and I was just blown away. He not only mentioned ocean deoxygenation, but put up that iconic figure that you'll probably see in almost every talk at this meeting. At least it's appeared in every talk so far. So the fact that Al Gore's, which was extremely well attended talk, he pulled out that subject. You've already heard about the SDG Sustainable Development Goals. There is none on ocean deoxygenation or oxygen, but the first one, the first target, 14.1 on pollution, does call out eutrophication and loss, and the infographic on the SDG website has oxygen loss featured there. You know, you've already heard about good. We're short on time. I'm not going to go into too much about this. If you've signed the Kiel Declaration, so the scientists are clearly working hard to transmit. What can we be doing with the oxygen information we have? And I think an important one arena is spatial planning. We can make climate projections, such as the one you see over on the right of the seafloor in 2040, oxygen changes, and we can build that into, we can use that to identify refugia and vulnerabilities. We can project time of emergence to help us identify priorities when oxygen changes are going to exceed national then we can help use this information to carry out area-based protections in the ocean. In the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity, they're looking at protected areas, 30 by 30. The BBNJ Treaty is looking at the design of MPAs. The International Seabed Authority is designing areas of particular environmental interest, no mining zones, and the regional fisheries management organizations are all identifying vulnerable marine ecosystems. And we could bring oxygen considerations into the design of all of these. In terms of environmental management more broadly, for example, for resource extraction, oxygen can be a consideration in regional environmental management plan design, in baseline studies and monitoring, and the design of triggers and thresholds and cumulative effects and understanding ecosystem services. I have 2 more slides. Another area we really need to be thinking about is climate mitigation. There are a whole series of ocean-based climate intervention options that will almost certainly affect oxygen in the ocean. And these include things like ocean fertilization, the deposition of crop waste on the deep sea floor, and sinking of macroalgae, and oxygen will appear in all of these. So really, the last thing I'd like to leave you with is a series of actions. There are all things we can be doing. One is to elevate oxygen to the summary for policymakers in all the global assessments, including the ones which I've listed up there. We use oxygen to international policy negotiations and implementation through NDCs and the ocean dialogues and treaties being negotiated. We can incorporate oxygen into area-based marine protections and management plans. We can work with industry to develop monitoring plans that help us distinguish their impacts, like the impacts of mining or fishing or oil and gas spills, from the climate impacts on oxygen. Let's see, we can consider the impacts of climate intervention. We can build adaptation capacity and ocean literacy. And to do this, we have to expand our observing networks, and we have to make all the data open access. And you've already heard about that from several others. So we have a lot of work left to do in the, but I think we made a good start, and we can continue. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one quick question. Are there any questions here on the floor? Otherwise, maybe on the chat. I don't. Anybody has a question from? Yes.
Just a quick question. So, what do you attribute this, let's say, lack of importance compared to, say, pH, for example? It's a much more observed quantity in the ocean. So you have CTDs that have oxygen sensors in it, so it's a much more constrained variable compared to other variables that have been more studied and given more importance.
I think the community hasn't organized itself well enough in the past to make the case in the places it needs to be made. Also, oxygen changes in the ocean are derived from warming and from nutrients, and not a direct impact like ocean acidification. But I do think the science community can work a little bit harder, learn how to communicate, work with the media to advance the topic. And I think we'll get there eventually.
One more quick question there. It's still on. It was. Oh.
Thank you, Lisa, for the nice overview. But just one question: do you see a risk that oxygen is being looked too much in isolation if we don't at the same time emphasize the connection to CO2, which is ocean acidification as well as warming? I think that would be needed for a comprehensive picture to always have that interface, or these interfaces.
I agree with you. I mean, we know any the ecosystems are responding to all these changes. However, having served on some panels that have looked at all of those things together, oxygen tends to disappear in the panel and it doesn't get the recognition it needs. So there are when we just need to be talking about oxygen alone. But yes, you're right. It's a multi-stressor world and we have to respond that way.
Thank you very much, which actually leads very nice to the next talk, which will be given by Denise Breitberg from the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, and her talk, sorry, that I name it correctly, multiple stresses, an important framework for equity in identifying socio-environmental problems and solutions.
What?
Oh.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here in Liège. And before I start my talk, I just wanted to make a comment. You've seen that image with my name on it several times already, and I just want to be sure everybody understands that that paper was a huge collaborative effort of everybody, all the wonderful colleagues in Ghan, of Kirsten, and of many other colleagues who contributed information. So I'm going to talk about something a little bit different today, although in a multiple stressors framework. It's very prominent in a lot of national documents, intergovernmental agreements, and in the literature to see calls for equity and social justice and the benefits that the ocean provides to human populations. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development calls for a just, equitable, and open and socially inclusive world in which the needs of the, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read, I've got part of this blocked, if somebody can help me with that, in which the needs of the most vulnerable are met. Is it possible to get rid of that? The Ocean Solutions Report that was commissioned by the, thank you, by the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy, envisions a sustainable ocean economy that would create a world in which resources are distributed more evenly. And peer-reviewed publications, including in the marine sciences, urge commitment to the pursuit of socially equitable conservation. It's not, I'm sorry. It's not, it's not. Okay, I'll click on that then. Okay. But also point out that inequality is a structural feature of the current ocean economy, and that climate change, other consequences of growing human population, and in fact, many aspects of the blue growth are making resource access and the burden of degrading resources more inequitable. Sorry. Okay. There's a call in natural sciences to adopt a multiple stressor approach to understanding and managing our changing ocean resources. The new scientific summary for policymakers by IOC on multiple ocean stressors points out the urgent need to determine how multiple ocean stressors combine and jointly affect in health, and that their cumulative pressure is more detrimental than a single stressor. And that's especially true of deoxygenation. Although I think Lisa is entirely correct that we really need to focus on deoxygen on its own a lot of times in the poly realm, we also all know from a scientific perspective that there are very strong interactions that are very important between oxygen, temperature, and other stressors that affect systems. That papers and social equity and justice often talk about multiple environmental issues, but without the nuance and the depth contained in multiple stressor-focused literature. And at the same time, papers focusing on multiple stressors and really looking at their interactions generally lack the in-depth assessment of social consequences of stressors found in the social science literature. So what we'd like to suggest is that it's time to start a conversation tying those two together, and that a multiple stressor approach might actually provide an important framework to help bridge goals related to equity and justice and goals related to environmental conservation and restoration. And one of the reasons is that a multiple stressor approach can be more comprehensive in defining options, and it makes the benefits and the consequences of choices more explicit by considering interaction. Are living in a world with multiple stressors, multiple stakeholders that are both causing and are affected by the consequences of those stressors. And that is the norm of the world that we are now living in and that we are increasingly moving into in the future. Before I go further in the talk, I want to step back with a bit of a caveat saying this is a perspective from two ecologists trying to bring these conversations together and highlight the linkages between multiple stressors and equity. But clearly, what we really need to be doing is bringing social scientists into this conversation. But what I'd like to do for this audience is to just bring forward three sorts of cases where a multiple stressor perspective can really be important to equitable actions. The first is the correct identification and apportionment of causes for environmental degradation and how important that can be for stakeholder support for mitigation actions. I'd like to use an example with oxygen in this case in Chesapeake Bay, where I work, and looking oxygen decline. There was general acknowledgement that there was a problem, but moving forward and getting stakeholder support for actions needed was really hampered because of the multitude of stakeholders involved. And we had, fingers being pointed is the American term at fishermen for the removal of fishers for the removal of suspension feeder biomass, oysters in Menhaden and the role that that might play in accumulation of algal biomass in the system. There's nutrients coming in from sewage treatment plants and from farms, from agriculture and livestock. And it really took many years of modeling, considering the multitude of stressors, the multitude of causes, the multitude of stakeholders involved, and getting both scientific answers and engaging these stakeholders to get support from all stakeholders, from all sectors. And ultimately what has been done is regulation of agriculture and sewage and targets related to this to attempt to reverse deoxygenation and regulation of fisheries really to restore and protect fisheries, but with a recognition that of their contribution to water quality. The second case that I'd like to talk about where multiple stressor perspective can be important is a clear understanding of the benefits and consequences of addressing local and global stressors. There are many calls now for controlling local stressors in order to increase resilience to global climate change stressors. This is true in coral reef systems, when we're talking about deoxygenation in coastal systems, and in places like the Mediterranean, with concern about fisheries. Identification of interactive effects can be really important to evaluate alternate pathways and to identify stakeholders and sectors that cause and are also affected by environmental problems. When we talk about these trade-offs in mitigation and adaptation actions and a focus on local action, the choices that we make can shift the burden and benefits among stakeholder groups in ways that affect access to ocean resources. They can place a heavier burden on local communities and sectors, but at the same time, a local focus can also provide opportunities to address local priorities and existing inequities. And sometimes, as in the example that I'll show you, both local and global actions are needed to protect resources that are valuable to a wide range of stakeholders. And it's because of the interactions among stressors that are highlighted in a multiple stressor framework. On Caribbean coral reefs, for example, protecting herbivorous fishes is very critical to allowing a net carbonate budget that's favorable to the maintenance and regrowth of corals. And even in the absence of, even under a business as usual scenario of greenhouse gas emissions, you can buy essentially a decade of time to address the climate change issues by focusing on local actions. But ultimately, it takes both the global and local actions to, in order to have sustainable reefs and reef systems. Whoop. Okay, and finally, last example is that various stressors can differentially affect genders and socioeconomic groups, and that the mitigation actions that are chosen may vary in whether they increase or decrease inequities in social justice. Multiple stressor perspective can allow really explicit evaluation of these choices. I'm sorry. So for example, in Galicia, Spain, and in many places around the world, fishing by activities by women are often on foot in the intertidal, while men from the same villages are using boats and fishing in the subtidal. There are a range of stressors affecting these systems, from climate change to urban pollution, and ways of addressing the problems, including fisheries regulations, and in this case, an non-native species. And whether the mitigation actions and adaptation actions are designed to primarily address intertidal or subtidal problems can determine whether they favor or make things harder for men versus women in the communities. And another example is in Chalika Lagoon in India, where fishers belong to lower castes than people involved in aquaculture. There's water exchange, pharmaceuticals, sludge from aquaculture feed, siltation, wide range of issues, and decisions to deal with the water exchange issue, for example, as opposed to other problems, can really affect which castes in the region are favored. Just 2 slides. So if we go back to the recommendations of the IOC Multiple Stressors Report, what we can see is that there are a number of actions from a multiple stressors science perspective that are recommended, identifying all the stressors affecting a location, identifying multiple interactions, developing mitigation and adaptation strategies that effectively address environmental issues. And just as a start of a conversation, we can think about the social parallels of that. For each of the stressors, we can look at the societal and economic and cultural causes and identify the sectors of society and the economy affected by stressor-induced environmental problems. We can determine whether interactions among stressors are distributed equally across secondary effects or the equivalent of interactions in stakeholder behaviors, and adaptation strategy by looking at these multiple stressors and their interactions, but look at them also from an equity perspective. So there are multiple stakeholders taking multiple actions that cause multiple stressors and affect multiple end users of ocean resources. That's the world that we live in now and are increasingly entering and affecting. And what Sarah and I are suggesting is that it may conversation about extending a multiple stressor framework as a tool for equity in access to ocean resources, as well as for conservation itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's time for one quick question from the floor or online. Yes, here's one.
Thank you. Could you maybe give an example of those mitigation strategies that would increase the inequities, for instance, in the aquaculturists versus fishers?
Yeah, so for example, the action that was taken to try to address the problem of siltation of the system, which is caused by agriculture and to some extent also by the aquaculture, was to create a new opening in the system that flushed more salt water into it, which then made the marginal land used for rice fields saltier, that land instead to be used for aquaculture. And there was some temporary benefit to fishers, but in the end, the fishing declined. I don't know enough about the system to know what other options could have been done, but an action taken did definitely affect the equity of resource access in the system.
Okay, thank you very much. First session of this conference and already half an hour delayed. I think we are doing pretty well. So now it's time for the coffee break, and after the one coach, Karen Limburg, will take over. Thank you very much, and applause to all the speakers of this morning.
So hello, my name is Karen Limburg, and I'm going to moderate the next set of talks. So it's my pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker, William Chung. Bill, as he's known, is a professor at the University of British Columbia in the Institute for Changing Oceans Research. His focus is on assessing the impacts of both fisheries and climate change on marine ecosystems and all of the amenities they provide, and also to try to reconcile the trade-offs that we have to make. And I am especially appreciative of Bill coming today because he's middle of the night back in British Columbia. So I'll let Bill take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. First of all, I'd like to sincerely thank the organizer for inviting me to speak in this conference. Before I start, it is a custom for us living in acknowledgement in order to recognize the place that I work and live in. I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation people. The work that I contribute to, okay, let's see. Okay. The works that I contribute to, the content that I'm presenting today are from the collaborations of our oxygen project team. The team includes Tilaka. She was my PhD student and is now a postdoctoral fellow working with me. The team also includes Thomas Fulliker and Anne Marie from the University of Bern. I believe Anne is here in the audience with you, as well as numerous members of my research group, as well as other collaborators. The ocean is providing us with a lot of essential ecosystem services. It is essential to biodiversity on Earth and to society because of the various things that they're providing to us, including climate regulation, food provisions, livelihood, culture, to name just a few. Activities. And these human stresses include overfishing, pollution, habitat destruction, and climate change have received large attention, particularly in recent years. The previous keynote speakers have highlighted that really eloquently already. And that's partly because of the recognitions of climate emergency and the increasing knowledge about how climate change is affecting the ocean. And this is a figure that Lisa also showed in her talk. It is from the IPCC Special Report for the Oceans and Cryosphere. Basically, it highlights that we have already detected changes in the ocean, and particularly the ocean has been losing oxygen in recent decades, and that this has been detected in most of the ocean basins. Ocean deoxygenations and ocean warming affects, among other stresses, affects marine ecosystems at various levels of organization. It affects changes in individual levels, including body size, reproduction, and survival, which then affects population abundance and biogeography. And these changes across species alter trophic interactions and communities. Ultimately, these affect human society. For example, through fisheries catches, which I study a lot. These changes have direct and indirect consequences of different dimensions of the well-being of human communities, particularly those that are important for sustainable development of many communities. In these presentations, I will talk about addressing ocean deoxygenation and warming in securing desirable and sustainable ocean future. Specifically, I will focus on some of the recent work by my research team to illustrate some of the key messages that I want to convey today. These key messages include, firstly, changing ocean temperature and oxygen levels are playing an important role in shaping the composition of pelagic and demersal fish stocks and fisheries. And secondly, signature of impacts of ocean deoxygenations and on warming already can be detected in terms of its impacts on seafood consumer. Thirdly, impacts of warming and deoxygenations are projected to impact sustainable development of many countries and exacerbate social inequity challenges. And finally, I will highlight that scenarios and models will help elucidate possible actions and policy levers for transformations to achieve desirable and sustainable food, climate, and biodiversity futures for the ocean. An index in order to illustrate my first message about how ocean deoxygenations and warming has already affected our ecosystems, fish stocks, and fisheries. This index is called Aerobic Growth Index. Hans already showed this in his keynote speech. Basically, at the individual organismal level, the functioning of marine ectotherms, including all fishes and invertebrates, is tightly linked to temperature and oxygen. Fish, like all other higher animals, need oxygen, and oxygen need for maintaining basic body needs for growth and reproduction. However, there's a maximum capacity of fish for oxygen intake. Warmer oceans increases metabolic rate of fish and thus demand more oxygen. But ocean deoxygenation imposes further limits to oxygen supply, and their inability to maintain the aerobic scope leads to trade-off across oxygen demand processes such as movement, growth, and reproduction. Yeah, sorry, there's some delay in the transition, so please bear with me on this. However, different species have evolved to respond to changing temperature and metabolic demand under changing ocean differently. Warmer adapted species have found ways to reduce the sensitivity of their metabolic oxygen demand to warming, such as through physiological or behavioral adjustments. In contrast, species that are adapted to cold environments are more warming and deoxygenation. This means that under climate change, particularly warming and ocean deoxygenation, we expect to see a shift in compositions, particularly an increase in warm and low oxygen adapted species, and decrease in cold adapted species that are sensitive to ocean deoxygenation. To explore this hypothesis, Taylor Clark and I developed a new method called the aerobic growth index. This index is simply a function of oxygen supply relative to oxygen demand of a species. Ocean warming increases oxygen demand, while ocean deoxygenation reduces oxygen supply. So the lower the index, higher risk of impacts of ocean warming and deoxygenations will be on the species. This method is based on the von Butter-Lamfy, is derived from the von Butter-Lamfy growth functions, which is a standard fisheries biology models that have been applied to many fish species, particularly those that are important to fisheries. And these data are available from open database such as FishBase for thousands of species of fish, as well as invertebrates through sea libraries worldwide. The AGI, or aerobic growth index, is analogous to the metabolic index that Curtis Dush and colleagues published. The main difference is that the metabolic index focuses on resting metabolic oxygen demand, while the AGI, our index, focuses on oxygen demand at no body growth as the limit, as the threshold. Also, the metabolic index relies on experimentally determined oxygen threshold. We compared and tested the results of both methods, and they give similar conclusions about the effects of warming and deoxygenations on the habitats of marine ectotherms. So we applied this index to case studies, and particularly focus on the Eastern Tropical Pacific Ocean. The different countries, exclusive economic zone in the Eastern Tropical Pacific, provide a very convenient gradient of temperature, oxygen level, and associated species community compositions to explore the sensitivity and responses to ocean deoxygenations and warming. Also, the tropical Eastern Pacific is a hotspot of ocean deoxygenation as well. Taylor and I used the index to further apply the index to study the fish stocks in the Eastern Tropic. But in this case, we start off with the upper water column, the pelagic species and the fisheries. We further use the AGI to develop a composite index of ocean deoxygenation to see how ocean deoxygenation has been affecting the fisheries catch compositions. This index is the average aerobic growth index rated by the annual fisheries catch of an exclusive economic zone. So if the fisheries are increasingly dominated by species with lower aerobic growth index, it means that the catches may become more at risk to warming and ocean deoxygenations and vice versa. I will not present the full set of results as it would be a talk of itself, but I will highlight the findings through the results for Ecuador, which is Ecuador is at southern end of the tropical Pacific region. We analyzed the annual fisheries catches from 1970 to 2016 and relate that to ocean oxygen level in the EZ, exclusive economic zone. We find a breakpoint of oxygen level at around 0.213 atmosphere of partial pressure oxygen. And when oxygen level is higher than this breakpoint, mean aerobic growth index of the catch increases as oxygen decreases. This means that fisheries catch are becoming more at risk to ocean deoxygenations and warming. However, mean AGI of the catch remains stable when oxygen levels decrease below the breakpoint. So we are wondering, why is that? Why is that a breakpoint, and what's the implications and what's the mechanisms, potential mechanism behind this breakpoint? The hypothesis that we propose is that it is because of the differences in the sensitivity of the species to deoxygenation. In order to investigate that, we use another variance of the AGI, and this time we use the oxygen demand components of the aerobic growth index to study the effects of that we just see, and particularly to represent the sensitivity of fisheries catches to ocean deoxygenation. If you still remember this figure that I showed in my earlier slide, some species are more adapted to deoxygenation compared to the others, and that affects the oxygen demand estimated in the aerobic growth index. The mean oxygen demand of the catch is the estimated oxygen demand of species weighted by their new catch. The higher the index, the more sensitive the fisheries to deoxygenation and warming. And here, we find that there is the same breakpoint as around 0.213 atmosphere of ocean partial pressure when we plot the mean oxygen demand of the catch against the oxygen level of the water. So we find that the lower oxygen level, especially during stronger equatorial upwelling period, it relates to the biological communities that is more dominated by species with low oxygen demand. That means lower MODC, or mean oxygen demand of the catch. Taylor and I then did similar analysis for the demersal fish communities, so those fish communities that live close to the sea bottom. And we find that there's a similar relationship. We find that temperature and oxygen supply in relation to the oxygen minimum zone, in this case, shaped the sea bottom community in the Eastern Tropical Pacific region. We also find a threshold which is much lower than the pelagic community. This threshold is around 0.003 to 0.009 atmosphere of oxygen partial pressure. This is reasonable because the demersal species are relatively more adapted to lower oxygen than pelagic community. Also, the impact of species depth distribution is found. So we find that during the neutral and El Nino conditions, with relatively warmer temperatures and higher oxygen levels, species average oxygen demand was higher, and species stayed at greater depth than during the cooler, lower oxygen La Nina phases. So the key message of this from this analysis is that we expect that this would help explain the changing species compositions of fisheries catch that we have already observed around the world. Overall, changing ocean temperatures and oxygen levels are playing an important role in shaping the compositions of pelagic and demersal fish stocks and fisheries. We know that climate change is affecting the ocean, fish stocks, and fisheries. However, we don't know yet how it affects people that are not that much connected to the ocean so far. Like everyone, many people that live in the city where they don't go out fishing or they don't even go near the coast very often. And one thing that we find a potential a connection that link the oceans to many people is through the seafood that they eat, and particularly when people go to restaurants, they will not a lot of the time order seafood, particularly in places where it is known for their food culture. So we try to find out information from the literature of whether there are already evidence about climate change affecting seafood that are served by restaurant to people, but we cannot find any information. So last summer, John Paul, who is a research assistant, working with me, and I try to answer these questions ourselves. Particularly, we look at seafood menus. It's because seafood menus provide a record of what the restaurants serve to customers, particularly in the present date, as well as historically, because we find that we could access historical seafood restaurant menus, museum archives, as well as other archives such as from our city hall. We look at seafood menus across time in Vancouver. We also look at the present-day menus in 2 other cities, north of Vancouver, Anchorage, Alaska, and south of Vancouver in Los Angeles in the USA. We then identify the fish species that occurred in the seafood menu as much as possible, and then try to identify the biology of these species, particularly in terms of their warm adapted or cold adapted species. Compute an index, which is similar to the mean AGI of the catch that I mentioned, but in this case, we use the mean temperature of the seafood species that are mentioned in the seafood menu. We call this the mean temperature of restaurant seafood, MTRS. It is the average preferred water temperature of the fish or shellfish appeared in the seafood menus in a place in the city at a particular time period. And we compute that for Vancouver, which is a big metropolitan with lots of seafood and lots of restaurants. And we compare that across 4 different periods. We find very interesting that there is a substantial increase in mean temperature of restaurant seafood from since pre-industrial time. We actually get seafood menus from the 19th century, and then be able to compare over time, over different decades until now. We find that these MTRS has increased from 9 degrees Celsius in the 1960s to 4 degrees Celsius in. We also compare that to the changes in sea surface temperature, which we find a significant relationship, as well as the mean temperature of fisheries catches. So in this case, we calculate a similar index, but then based on landings. So it provides a substantial evidence to show or this increases in the preferred water temperature of fish and shellfish. Changing fisheries species come in British Columbia, where Vancouver is located at. We also find a consistent spatial gradient of the MTRS between 2 different cities, north and south of Vancouver. So, as expected, the seafood menu in Anchorage is colder compared to Vancouver, while the seafood menu in Los Angeles actually is hotter than Vancouver. So this again provide an evidence that the seafood menu actually can reflect some partially the species compositions in the environmental conditions of where the fisheries are catching their seafood. And the species of what's driving these changes. We find one example that has been recorded before the 1980s in any seafood menu that we find. We look almost 400 seafood, and it occurred. The Humboldt squid occurred in south of the British Columbia, and we know that during warm water, warm years, the Humboldt squid expand their range in Vancouver, and that has been in scientific literature as well as in the media. And we know that Humboldt squid is warm and deoxygenated adapted species. Vertical migrations across optimum zones. It can do metabolic suppressions in hypoxic waters. So they are adapted to deoxygenated waters. So what it means is that it matched with our hypothesis that the waters, particularly during extreme time periods, such as during the block or the extreme events in the Northeast Pacific, it drives a shift in species compositions towards the more warm adapted, deoxygenated adapted species compositions, as we have in other parts of the tropical Eastern Pacific. So for that, the key message that we find in this is that there's a signature of impacts of ocean deoxygenation on seafood consumers that has been detected, and we expect that these changes will continue to do. Our previous work that do simulation modeling suggests, for example, that sardine will become over again, and so we are looking to see whether in the next few years we will see more sardine in our seafood menu. Finally, I want to talk about how we use scenarios and projections to adjust ocean deoxygenation to secure desirable and sustainable ocean futures. We have been doing a lot of modeling work in our team. Particularly, we develop and use integrated model to elucidate the global impacts of deoxygenation and warming, as well as other environmental stresses on fish and invertebrates and dependent human communities. We account for the effects on biomass, shift in distribution, potential catch, and their effects on food, revenue, and jobs. So things that matters to settlement. To characterize warming and deoxygenation, we use projection from Earth system model projections. We also use models that look at specifically for fish stocks. We also have models that are developed for mariculture production. And these models are then driven by as well as climate change scenarios, the emission pathway, to simulate changes in ecosystem or fish stocks and fisheries and the human dimensions impacts as well. I won't go into all the modeling details, but we'll be happy to talk with you after the presentation. So you can email me and we can arrange that. So just to give you some example of the kind of projections that we do, this is based on our integrated models that look at the change impacts of warming and deoxygenations on as well as the key macronutrients that fisheries and mariculture will provide to different countries. So through that, we can highlight that first of all, the impacts are not felt equally between countries. Some countries, such as particularly the tropical countries, and particularly those countries that are dependent on the oceans, seafood for nutrients or for revenues and jobs, such as West Africa or the Indo-Pacific regions or the tropical Pacific region. They are the most impacted across many dimensions of that are important for sustainable development. So that highlights the aspect of the challenge that climate change is exacerbating the challenge to social inequity in different parts of the world. The different pathway, societal development pathway affects how we achieve important indicators for sustainable development. So in this case, we use get the ecology part, the economic part, as well as the social. Basically, this is just an example of one of our analysis. And we look at the SSP3, the regional rivalry scenario, which in a high emission scenario. And in this case, we find a substantial in the three important indicators for sustainable development by 2030s relative to 2000s period. And with lower emission scenarios, it can reduce the impact, but still there's a decrease relative to the recent past. And having a more sustainable pathway actually can do a big help in ensuring or securing these three dimensions. Although there's still a small loss in, for example, in terms of jobs and in terms of ecology, the level of those losses is considered to be lower. It potentially be able to be adapted through other interventions. The need to develop a pathway that would allow us to achieve different desirable ocean futures. We need to define what our desirable ocean futures is like, whether we want more biodiversity, more or more utilization of the oceans. But then also what are the transformative changes that are needed in order to achieve to decide these ocean futures is that we need to these futures also need to be good futures for biodiversity and ecosystem services. Although the dimension of focus can be different, but then they should all be a good sustainable future that we should target for. Then it is a matter of what are the policies that will be needed to achieve that, and through scenarios and modeling exercises to identify the options, the potential options that can help us achieve these futures, as well as the cost and benefits and the interventions over different time periods that are needed to achieve that. There are many knowledge gaps. I think many of the speakers have highlighted earlier on. And some of the things that I highlight here are those that we are currently addressing that include, for example, Lisa and colleagues and I have been working on some of the assessment of the vulnerability of some of the exploited species to ocean deoxygenations in the deep oceans, which is another ecosystem that are particularly limited in terms of knowledge. And also, there's a need to look at compound exchange. In this case, the extreme events not only for heat waves, but then also for deoxygenation on marine species. And my colleague Anne-Marie will be presenting some of those work on Wednesday in the morning, your time. And we also, Taylor and I also are working on the project that look at the effects of warming and ocean deoxygenation on reef fish, as on global fisheries. And the IPES scenarios and modeling task force, as well as a new partnership that we are starting, is starting to address the role of ocean deoxygenations and solving it in the pathway towards a desirable, sustainable ocean futures. So with that, I just want to reiterate the key message from my talk, which is that warming and ocean deoxygenation is already shaping the composition of pelagic and demersal fish stocks and fisheries. We actually can also detect signatures of these changes on people that are less connected to the oceans through the seafood they can consume in restaurants. The impacts of warming and deoxygenations are projected to impact sustainable development for many countries, and particularly those countries that are dependent on the oceans, and that would exacerbate social equity challenges. And scenarios more can be useful to help elucidate possible actions and policies for transformation to achieve a desirable futures or in terms of food, climate, and biodiversity for the ocean. So with that, thank you very much. And thanks again for inviting me to speak in detail.
Thank you, Bill, for an excellent presentation. I think we're running a little behind, so I think I will hold questions and feel free to ask Bill during some kind of break you can arrange with him. Our next speaker, and I need somebody to help me with getting the talk up here. Our next speaker is Erica Ferrer, who is going to speak about aquatic deoxygenation as a 10th planetary boundary.
Is the bottom. Okay. Just practicing here. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I'll be presenting this talk on behalf of myself and co-authors, and just want to preface all of this by saying a lot of this work is nascent, and in its, though we've been working together for a fair amount of time to develop the ideas behind this project, it's nascent in the sense that we're open to feedback, and I hope to get a lot of that this week while talking with you all. So the Planetary Boundaries Framework, originally proposed by Rockstrom and colleagues in 2009, outlines 9 manifestations of and limitations on anthropogenic pressure to our biosphere. These manifestations and limitations, referred to simply as boundaries, include those shown here: climate change, novel entities, stratospheric ozone depletion, atmospheric aerosol loading, ocean acidification, biogeochemical flows, namely phosphorus and nitrogen, freshwater use, land system change, and biosphere integrity, which here encompasses genetic and functional diversity. In the green, which is already highlighted here, we have a safe zone. I'm going to fiddle with the slide here. I should have mentioned earlier that one of the perks to the Planetary Boundaries Framework, as I see it, is that it delineates how all of these boundaries, all of these different Earth system processes operate in synchrony to produce planetary scale limits, resource consumption, and anthropogenic disruption to our biosphere. In the green, we have what's known as a safe space. In the red, we have an unsafe space. And we have what's called the zone of uncertainty. And essentially, you can think of the zone of uncertainty itself. So there are also a few planetary boundaries circled here that have yet to be quantified, and these question marks represent active areas of research. Conceptually, this framework speaks to the many ways, like I said, in which these boundaries are operating in synchrony. And the authors themselves actually describe one of the perks of this framework to be defining the conditions for a safe operating space, or the planetary boundary conditions required to maintain Earth. In a relatively short amount of time, this framework has gained remarkable traction in both scientific and political spheres, laying the groundwork for notable studies on sustainable growth and equitable standards of living under climate change. It has also motivated studies on defining new boundaries or sub-boundaries, ranging from marine plastics to green water. And yet you may notice that oxygen or deoxygenation is missing from this picture. And therefore, my colleagues and I propose amending the framework to include aquatic deoxygenation, or ADO for short, as a 10th planetary boundary. So ADO refers to the contemporary trend of declining oxygen that has been observed throughout the world's aquatic ecosystems. So not just marine, which is a big focus of this week, but freshwater and brackish systems as well. And this phenomenon has been observed since at least the beginning of the 20th century. There are some very old and good papers describing the loss of oxygen, particularly in coastal ecosystem freshwater ways. Like the other 9 currently recognized boundaries, ADO is a serious problem with the potential to impair the maintenance of life on Earth, especially if left unchecked. And if we transform this polar here into a bar graph in XY space, it should look something like this. With current level climate change and land system change solidly entrenched in the zone of uncertainty, then boundaries such as biogeochemical flows and biosphere integrity in all likelihood probably having been surpassed already. So definitely watch out for those. So we propose amending the framework to include aquatic deoxygenation, which might slide in right about here. And I'll talk about the exact height of this bar in a few minutes, as this represents a key contribution from our research group. But first, I think it's worth discussing the merits behind the proposal and some of the main drivers behind aquatic deoxygenation. So in the open ocean, declines in dissolved oxygen are primarily attributed to warming, whereas loss of oxygen in coastal and freshwater environments is compounded by and frequently attributed directly to eutrophication and nutrient runoff. In both freshwater and marine ecosystems, stratification and decreased water column mixing are known to play important roles. And for example, in the deep waters of temperate lakes surveyed primarily in North America and Europe, this process of thermal stratification is so profound that my colleagues Jane et al. In that 2021 paper have detected a nearly 20% decline in total dissolved oxygen since 1980. Meanwhile, in the ocean, the average amount of dissolved oxygen has declined, as many of you know, by more than 2% since the mid-20th century. And in some ocean environments, DO is declining at rates far above average. A number of these deoxygenation hotspots, for want of a better term, are shown here. And I know that several members in the audience know these waters well. So this brings me to the merits of the proposal. Empirical evidence demonstrates levels of dissolved oxygen in marine, brackish, and freshwater environments are declining. And in many cases, these declines impart severe ecological and social ecological stress. Despite our understanding of some of the primary mechanisms behind aquatic deoxygenation, these changes have been poorly forecasted by many models to date, and we cannot use existing planetary boundaries to make accurate predictions about dissolved oxygen. Most models forecast changes in oxygen by simulating biogeochemical processes that are poorly constrained. In general, these models underestimate external forcing and notoriously underperform when it comes to predicting oxygen's temporal variability. They tend to perform quite poorly in the tropics, and on the whole, oxygen seems to behave with something. To me, this is one of the most compelling reasons to consider this proposal and to consider the independent boundary. The second reason is intellectual. It would be helpful to have more data and more research related to this topic, such that we as a community can hone our understanding and improve our scientific inquiries. We'll circle back to this at the end of the talk. The third reason is pragmatism. So we contend that because public awareness about this issue is generally lacking, there exists tremendous political and managerial impetus for including aquatic deoxygenation as a 10th planetary boundary. In doing so, we expect to garner increased attention for and greater capacity allotted towards understanding the causes of aquatic deoxygenation. In turn, this may allow us to better address its consequences or respond with. Likewise, we reason that greater public awareness is likely to generate increased financial support for oxygen projects of colleagues to inform our own process of amending the framework. And this is a nice example from Nash and colleagues from 2017, where they've adapted the framework to better acknowledge the role that's in regulating Earth's climate. They integrate in the marine environment, use of fresh water for seafood and aquaculture production, to marine plastics that now proliferate the ocean world. In this same paper, the authors describe the steps that you would take in defining a new boundary. So the first step is articulating the process of change. Next, it's important to categorize whether or not that process has threshold-like behavior and if it's an issue at the global scale. From there, you need to identify a response, 2 or 3, which highlight the scale and gravity of the process or change. And fourth, defining a control variable is key. This control variable is a measure used to determine how that process how close that process is, to exceeding the safe operating space that I defined earlier. For example, in the case of climate change as a boundary, the control variable is the measure of atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration measured in parts per million, or the energy imbalance in watts per meter squared. Finally, when defining a new boundary, it's important to summarize the current state of that process and a value for the control variable. You see that for climate change, well, this potentially has not been updated in a while, but when they published, they were explaining that the boundary is somewhere around 398.5 parts per million or 2.3 watts per meter squared. In our case, aquatic oxygenation is a process which exhibits threshold-like behavior and is a global scale issue. And 2 examples of responses to deoxygenation include expanding oxygen minimum zones in the open and off the continental shelf, as well as low oxygen zones in both coastal and inland waters. These low oxygen zones, as many of you know, are frequently described as dead zones, which is a bit of a misnomer because, well, not everything in these zones are dead, but they do tend to exhibit lower species diversity. So now we turn to the matter of deciding upon a control variable. Within our co-authors, we are discussing which to pick, and while we have favorites, we remain open to additional input, like I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, time does not permit me to go into the pros and cons or details associated with each of these control variables we might pick from, but I'll point out a few here. So oxygen concentration, for example, is a useful measure that can help us to easily identify low oxygen or no oxygen zones. Likewise, some volumetric rate of change might be useful with similar units divided by time. The nice part of using a volumetric rate of change is this might help us understand prolonged versus short periods of oxygen deprivation, which from a biological or physiological standpoint is incredibly important. Next, you might consider a metabolic index. So we've talked about some of this already today, but for example, you might use a synthesis of energy budgets from either sentinel species, maybe species that traverse both freshwater and marine environments, or you could take some conglomeration of representative taxa. And finally, we have percent oxygen saturation. One of the more obvious pros to using percent oxygen saturation is that it's relatively easy and cheap to collect. Emphasis on relatively. It's been collected either directly or indirectly for quite some time and can be reconstructed using temperature, salinity, and pressure data. It's simple to understand, so folks who are not experts on oxygen can kind of quickly pick up what percent oxygen saturation means and associate that with levels of changes in oxygen that are associated with signs of ecosystem or biological stress. One downside to using percent oxygen saturation, however, is that because it's so heavily dependent on temperature, a body of water that's warming might get the same percent oxygen saturation reading today, despite than it did 10 years ago. So as you can see, each of these choices comes with good and bad. Next, a key question that I alluded to is how severe is this problem? In this context of the planetary boundaries framework, you might wonder, are we already existing in the zone of uncertainty? We return to this figure where the bar indicating the extent and severity of aquatic deoxygenation implies that it's somewhere shortly after or before climate change and land system change in terms of boundary exceedance. However, given that aquatic deoxygenation is often thought of as a consequence of warming and massively exaggerated by geochemical flows such as nitrogen and phosphorus, it's not unreasonable to think that the bar for ADO might be quite a bit higher. So Another thing that I wanted to point out that we have a lot of uncertainty in the zone of uncertainty is that the memory of the ocean is quite long compared to the memory of the atmosphere, for example. So changes in dissolved oxygen lived in areas where water turnover is low, and even small declines today be quite biologically potent. Because of this, our ability to avoid detrimental changes down the line is profoundly impacted by the inertia that we imbue at this very moment. And so for that reason, I think, again, it's not unreasonable to imagine that the bar for aquatic deoxygenation might be quite a bit higher. Our team is currently debating the height and size of this bar and reviewing the literature to give it the most precise estimate that we can. Finally, before I close, it's worth reviewing how this amendment can be put to good use. We can use this amendment to garner political support and public awareness for the issue of aquatic deoxygenation. We can use the amendment to explore and document the interactions between it and other global change phenomena. We can highlight areas of remaining scientific need and identify points of entry for research and interventions. So one of the things that I'm excited about hearing about this week is seeing how we can link international efforts to oxygen data to defining local regional water quality, making suggestions for environmental management. And finally, we can use this plan for the future. So with that, I'll conclude and take any questions if there are any. Thanks very much for your time and engaging with these important topics. I think really great to see you all here, and I'm looking forward to meeting you throughout the week. In the middle.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I really wondered whether you could the information coming from oxygen concentration and your saturation in PO2, partial pressure of oxygen. It combines both. And this is also the most relevant for biology. So maybe that solves part of your problem, but we could discuss more. I'm always intrigued why many people report oxygen concentrations and not partial pressures.
Let's discuss more. So we've actually talked about that in our discussions together. But I think that right now, kind of the debate that we're having is between, for example, pressure, percent oxygen saturation or concentration versus something that's more synthetic by nature, so like a metabolic index, for example. And I think a lot of this just comes down to like what data is available, what's going to be viable moving forward, and how can we use data from the past to inform the present. Yes, thank you for your question. I think it's a good option.
Okay, thank you very much, and more later, of course. So our next speaker is Madam Chairwoman, Marie-Laure Gregoire, a woman who needs no introduction. And so she is going to talk about the Global Ocean Oxygen Database.
So with this talk, we would like the community towards Ocean Oxygen Database and Atlas for assessing and predicting deoxygenation and in the coastal and in the open ocean. This effort, community effort that we have coordinated, Véronique Garçon, who is here in the room, and the story started 2.5 years ago or less. We had a meeting in Sopot, and you see the people that were present there, representatives of the EMOTNet with the World Ocean Database, with GLOBE, with gliders, with different communities, SOCAT community as well, because the idea is to have a product quite similar to the SOCAT one, but for oxygen. And after 2.5 years later, we had this paper that has been published in Frontiers in last December as a 45 institution. And this paper describes what we mean by this global ocean oxygen database and why we need that absolutely, why currently this information is like to have it and how we can build that, a kind of roadmap. And this is exactly the point. First, what do we have in mind by this GODAT? Why do we need it? And why is it so thin? And how can we build this GODAT? So first, what's this global atlas? So here it's both this GODAT, both a base where you will gather the data set from the coastal and open ocean, fairly available, using, that's very important, and very well documented quality check and quality flagging. So it's really 3 points where you are sure the data that are there have been quality controlled in a uniform way as well. We would like to gather all the types of data, Winkler, of course, CTD, Argo, gliders, mooring, and also the new observing systems. And then from that, we would like to build different level of products. One product that will gather the Winkler data from the different set that we have in the world. One, the Winkler plus the CTD, one with Argo, Winkler, CTD, Argo, and gliders. And then after the emerging system. Why is it needed? So you have seen many times this figure that show enormous effort that have been done by Bolias and Rutger Rosenberg, who tried to make an invention hypoxic site. They mention more than 700, and they make a very huge investigation. So it's really bibliographic. And so the question I would like to, you see these red points represent hypoxic sites, and we would like to know how the data can fit with this hypoxic site. What does it mean, this site? How many when we have a red dot here? So that we have investigated, and so we look at that base, so we look at the what, and we look at Imod produce a unique data set, the same units, and we did that for the last 60 years. We just focus first on wind. What's the information that we have for the global coastal ocean? And so this information that you see here, they are for what we call the coastal ocean. So it means the ocean where the depth is lower meters, and it's only for the bottom, so it means it's have been collected at 15 meters bottom. So the number of data points that we can have in this different database, it's more than 600,000 data points. And the different colors that you can see on the map show the number of ponds that you have over the last 60 years. And so what you can see, it's most of the ponds, they are in pink, meaning that for most of the region, you have less than 5 data points for the Winkler around the last 60 years. Of course, you have regions that cover, for instance, the Baltic Sea, and we had the talk before on that, the Black Sea, and here the eastern coast of the US, and here in the eastern in the Western Pacific, sorry, we have some more data coverage, but most part of the data that we have. Now, if we look at the hypoxic side, so which where do we have concentration below 63 microliter? And so here you can see the map, you can obtain the databases. So that shows that we have about 3.5% of sites that have been hypoxic. If we compare with the Diaz and Rosenberg maps, we can see that we are quite good agreement, but we have some differences in terms of the regional mapping. For instance, here along the America, and here sometime along here in Asia. There are some, the agreement is good, but what you can see is that again, all the dots, they are in pink, so meaning that with the current amount of data database cannot characterize this hypoxia dynamics. And this is what we need if we want to connect with biodiversity. We need information about the seasonal cycle. So far, it's not possible. It's not possible. So then another question, we compare decades. And so here for the 70s here at the top and below the 2000s. You see that the amount is very similar. We have even more data in the 2000s compared to the 70s. But what we see is that we have less coverage in the 2000 compared to the 70s. You see, for instance, in the Southern Hemisphere, we have data in the database compared to the situation in the 70s. This could be due to the fact that we switched from Winkler to the sensor, but there can also be some data are not delivered to the database. Okay, and then if you look at hypoxia, so here, if you look at hypoxia, of course, you have information in some region because you do not have this data. Another reason why we need this database and atlas, so we have seen for the coastal ocean that we miss some information, and for the global ocean, it's the same. If you look at the of the oxygenation trend, find many different estimates. There are still an uncertainty. Data products. Why that? Why is this different? So you see it vary from 2% to 0.6%. So here, why is it due to that? Because you do not have any entry point where you can download open data. You need to go to different databases. And when you go to different databases, of course, you quality check, quality flagging, different interpolation methods, and then it's very difficult to compare for having a consistent of the deoxygenation trend. To read what I mean, I just here copy the different quality control procedures that you have, and on the right from the World Ocean Database. And so you see that the basic checks, they are quite common, but if we look at the second, at the more automatic and manual check, you can see some differences. So the idea is not to write one method better than the other, okay, get me right on that, but it's just to show differences. And that's how it could be complicated for the users of this data. And so, for instance, the difference is that in some databases, you have on the gradient and based on the density inversion that you do not have in other databases. So in terms of flagging, this results in difference. So here you have the flagging in EMOTNet, and here you have the flagging in the WOD. And so you see this number represent the quality flags. And so here you see in EMOTNet that it goes from 0 to 9. In the WOD, goes also to 0 to 9, but the flagging, the reason for the flagging is quite different. So in EMOTNet, you have the flagging that could be due to good value or probably good value. In the WOD, it's different. It's when you fail to succeed to pass the gradient test, etc. And so here it illustrates as well the differences. You have a mapping of the different flagging. And so you see the flagging of the EMOTNet and the flagging of the WOD, and you see they are quite different. So what we are proposing is to revise this flagging. And then in terms of having this flagging good data or probably good data, what we think about is to link the flagging to the scientific question that you want to address. And so here in the paper, we have highlighted a few scientific questions that you would like to address with the databases and the accuracy and the precision that you would need if you want to address the scientific question. And so you see that it can vary. If you want to assess the global deoxygenation trend, you would need to have here a very high accuracy. But if you want just to have a mapping of hypoxic area, the accuracy constraint can be a bit released. And so the idea would be right to have a flagging that tells to the user, if you have the scientific question, this data is appropriate for you, rather than having it's good or it's probably good or it's probably bad. So it's maybe something that we can think about. And just to finish, yeah, so it's for this is very timely, so it's now that we have to think about it, because as you see, the number of sensor data, they are very much increasing. They are very much increasing, and we have now almost the same amount of sensor compared to the Winkler, but the quality is a bit different in the sensor compared to the Winkler. And so we really have to pay attention to the calibration procedure of the sensor data that you are using. And this is also something that we show in the paper. What is important, it's not only the sensor, but it's also the protocol that you will apply to this sensor. And then the last slide, okay, it's all we see the roadmap to build this GODAT. So we see as a united UN efforts in the frame of the good program that we have. And so very strong coordination with IODE and with the existing GDAC, of course. We are not starting from scratch. There are already excellent things that are existing. So we would like to link so with the GDAC, Argo, gliders, etc., and with the scientific community, so with you, of course, we'd like to define the protocol for the metadata, for the quality check, for the quality flagging, to agree on a common format or common standards, and then to make nice documents to go to the Ocean Teacher program to document to the users, the providers, the best practice. And then the providers, they would have to submit the data set either to the GDAC, for instance, Argo gliders, or to the national ocean data centers, and then it will flow then up to the GODAT. So the idea is really to privilege a bottom-up to an ODC, and if it's not possible, we really have to trace the adjustment, the quality adjustment that have been done on the data set in order to document them to the user, for the user knowing what he's using. And that's my last slide, so thank you. And so this effort, we have submitted a project to the UN Decade for endorsement, and so we hope that we will receive the support to build this GODAT. Thank you so much.
We have time for a question or two.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I was wondering about the calibration for the CTD data. How you're planning to work with the problem about the CTD data that most of the time, whether they are calibrated or not?
Yes, so this is a very difficult question to go back. For the historical data, it's difficult. For the new data, we can make some recommendations for the new data that are coming. For the past data, it's quite difficult. So as they did in GLODAP, for instance, they are trying to compare Winkler, so and then to make some post adjustment after something very difficult. So I don't know if we have a lot of matching between the past CTD and between the Winkler. But a recommendation would be certainly to have in the next Winkler profile, when you have the CTD in order to make the calibration afterwards, it's not always available. For the past data, it's really something that we need to discuss with the expert. That's a very good point, sure. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. That was really interesting. There's one data provider that I didn't see in your presentation, but I think is quite important, fish surveys. They collect a lot of oxygen data, especially for parts of the world where the academic community doesn't always have great records. But one of the issues is fishery surveys almost never have Winkler calibration data. And so I think it's a really important data input to this program, but also a real consideration of how we as a community deal with that data.
And thank you so much for the question. So that's exactly the problem. You have a lot of data in the world, a lot of data set, and we will illustrate that with the hackathon that we will describe after. And so we really need to link with the data scientists and starting to do, you see the map here, it's a data scientist, an engineer that did that with me. This community to integrate the different the quality check and flagging. And that's really that's a very important point to because for sure we have more data compared to what, but they are not in database. So for, but it's also, I would say, an engagement, different data center, and also countries. So it's political as well. So it's a wide effort, and we need all of you for that, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It looks like an amazing effort that you are doing. And maybe in the same line, I was thinking in other platforms, maybe like moorings, they're also going to be considered in all these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so during this huge work to see if they have GDAC or not. So because Argos are already well organized, so that's some DAC in Argos, they have different control and flagging. So even in one platform, you can have different things. Gliders is starting to emerge. And for the mooring, I have to check, I guess starting as well, you have some best practice documents that are available, but it's also something that we have to encourage. Sure. And Bentic as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Marie-Laure. I'm wondering about the difficulties with Winkler titration concentrations. We have measurements from 20 years now with sensors at the bottom in the entrance of the Baltic Sea with 1 hour interval. There we have hypoxia every year, and the which are taken every month, they report 2 times hypoxia. So it's a big discrepancy between the two, and it's quite clear that oxygen taking water is not suitable, and then there is a risk of contaminating when you empty your your Niskin bottles as well. I don't know how you address this, because this is a really tricky issue. I think sensors are far more better today than the Winklers are at low oxygen.
Yeah. For sure. So OMZ, they are very critical. And Emilio, I don't know if Emilio is here, but in the maybe you can say something. But it's a box in the papers. It's the challenge of measuring very low oxygen concentration, because you can have contamination, and to make correction afterwards, it's difficult, because if I remember well, it depends on the nitrate concentration, something like that, and then you need to have an information on that. And Emilio, maybe you are the expert. I'm not.
Yeah, we just published kind of recently a manuscript about this oxygen contamination in all the Niskin bottles and so on, and all this contamination that is dragged to the Winkler measurement. So all these Winkler analyses in OM sets, in oxygen minimum zones, are deviated from sort of say reality, and they're providing some oxygen concentration that they are not real. But with the in situ sensor, you can correct that, but also they have script and some offset that has to be taken into account. So we also show that in the NMR script. Yeah, thank you.
And it highlights also the need to make recommendation of the protocol for sampling OMZ. So you need to have some information if you want to correct towards, otherwise you cannot make correction. So that's,
Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Okay, so of course, Marie-Laure will be here through the week. It's her conference, so you can talk to her. So thank you very much for that. And I see your work is cut out for you, or all of us. And so the last speaker who will introduce today is Sandra Kettelhake, if I pronounce that correctly. And she's online?
Yes, it's the result of the hackathon that we have launched with the Good program. So we launched a hackathon in connection with the G7 and with the Digital Twin Initiative. And so Sandra organized that for us. She was very helpful, and she's online normally. Sandra.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Sandra.
And unfortunately, or luckily, I'm not the last presenter. So our winning teams will present as well their results. And I have the pleasure to present you this article or this activity of GON in the frame of good. And as we already learned from Andreas and from Marie-Laure a few minutes ago, in the next 2 years, one focus of the UN Ocean Decade Program Good and the GON network is mapping and modeling oxygen, which means to fully exploit data of new platforms with oxygen sensors and develop a global ocean oxygen atlas, GODAT, to enhance monitoring and prediction capacities of ocean oxygen on coastal, regional, and global scales. And so having this in mind, we identified that a hack opportunity to connect to the scientific ocean oxygen community with experts in, for example, the IT and programming community, and start developing ideas for the Atlas. So the first International Digital Twins of the Ocean Summit, which took place in early, provided a chance to submit the Godot hackathon as satellite, connecting to interested experts and early careers. And yeah, so I wasn't the only organizer. So we had a team consisting of Kirsten, Marie-Laure, Renonique, Andreas, and Jonas, and myself. So a big thanks to you as well, and supporting this. And I unfortunately do not see the arrows. So yeah, thanks for.
Sandra, sorry, I think you are able to, yeah, okay, you have control. Okay.
I have the control, I guess. Yes. Okay, so here you see the overall goal of the hackathon, which was to create a prototype or prototypes that enhance the value of a marine oxygen database, which is needed for developing and improving model products for decision-making processes. The hackathon encouraged data sharing, capacity exchange, and building of multidisciplinary teams. And here you see the challenges our hackathon focused on. They were taking into account data exploitation to fully exploit of new observing platforms with oxygen sensors, as said, to enhance the monitoring and prediction capacities of ocean oxygen on coastal, regional, and global scales. There we had like two teams, Team Cephisus and Team Pacific O2, who looked into this. A second challenge was on quality standards, and O2 global data is no team applied for this. And the last one was on integrating coastal and open ocean data in Godot, which Pacific O2 focused on. And at the bottom of the slide, you see our two teams, Cephius and Team Pacific O2. And just a few outcomes and outcomes and next steps. And on the right, you see like our 13 data providers, which provided data sets and information, which the teams could use for the hackathon. And we had 2 participating teams with in total 7 members, over 30 registrations, the participant guide and presentation, the 13 data sets and providers, and 1 prototype was developed for integrating coastal the Southeast Pacific. And then we had as well a database and toolbox. And the lessons learned were that the hackathon can bring talent and create new ideas and prototypes. But as you see from the registrations and only 7 members actively participating in the hackathon, the next time we would need to connect participants and teams and need to encourage them more. And so one next step could be that we are submitting a challenge to the Ocean Hackathon 2022, which is taking place in December. Andreas shortly mentioned this morning, initiative by the Campus Mondial de la Mer, and encourage as well sharing the use of new digital technologies and an ensure it's 48 hours nonstop. Or in the end, in the cities that take part in this hackathon, one team will be elected and can present their type at the grand finale in Brest and may win a prize for this. So here the 15 cities where the hackathon is taking place, and so the opportunities for Gone and Good in connecting to the ocean hackathon is to have an even broader community to engage with, since the hackathon is now existing since 2016. So it has brought together a new community around the ocean and digital environments. The venues are the world, so we can pick a city that best suits us. And the promotion is even broader than we had for the GoToDat. And we can build an even bigger community around developing GoDat. And our winning teams, for example, can further develop their prototypes and connect to others. And with this, I'm waiting for the next slide, which hopefully comes soon. With this, I would ask our support team in Liège to start the video of Team Cepheus, which consisted of Yohai based in the US, Mohammed in Bangladesh, and Hussein based in Morocco. So you see here, they all registered as single participants. That it was a great opportunity to bring teams together. And then after this pre-recorded presentation, and I think we unfortunately have no one participating online. So if you have a question, just ask Veronique, Marie-Laure, Kirsten, Andreas, or Jonas in Liège for providing or giving their email addresses so that you can contact them. And afterwards, we will have the presentation from Team Pacific 02, which consisted of Opemi based in the US, Anna based in Canada, and Maria Divan based in Chile. And thanks a lot again to the teams developing the prototypes and our data providers, of which some are in Liège too. So enjoy the presentations of our winning teams.
Welcome, everyone. This is the team effort. The study is towards an understanding of the ocean oxygen based on the new data platform. I am Dr. Mohan Kumar Das from National Oceanographic and Maritime Institute, Bangladesh. My teammate, Yuhi Takano from NL, he is an ocean modeler. And Mr. Nibani Hussain, he is from AZIR, Morocco. He is the observations and monitoring aspect. As we are from different platform, that is team effort, and different perspectives and data needs are important. For interdisciplinary research, like atmospheric scientists studying impact on marine ecosystem, formatted gridded dataset access is essential with knowledge and descriptions. For an ocean modeler, that is important to formatted gridded datasets will be helpful, but model evaluation from an example data CMIP6 is required. The coordinated gridded ARC carbon dioxide and relevant variables need to use for successfully in the CMIP6 model studies. For the community and observation aspects, need community standards, metadata, and quality control, which is necessary for incorporating to assimilation and predicting system. In this slide, level 0, no database, and level 1, formatted data, and level 2, gridded data. Preparing from an observational database to gridded or binary bin data is quite a feat. Model search data analysis usually deal with the structured data, and tools are generally designed for that. In collaboration with the tool developing and like cloud data, community expert NGO, we should extend the tools and add capability on handling irregular data, such as observations. Also, sharing information on quality control, uncertainty are necessary. Communication, documents, and workshop. Here, we tried to show Geo2 data community platform. Like basically the summary schematic showing what mentioned in the previous slides. One thing to note, looking and processing observation data self is important. Even formatting data from the original data source requires some work and careful checking. Again, the guideline would be helpful. Ideally, it would be nice if the future platform could access from level 0 to level 2. Here we analyze ecological marine units data, which are constructed on a regularly spaced ocean point mesh grid from sea surface to sea floor and attributed with data from 2013 World Ocean Atlas version 2. For time constant, we just showed one variable, that is dissolved oxygen at different level. Here we have found at the surface level, like equator to 20 degrees north and 20 degrees south, the variation is not that much significant. It varies from 3.5 to 5 milliliter per liter. But in the 200-meter depth, the variation is significant, especially Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea region variations are not similar to the some parts of the Northwest Pacific regions. But at 1,000-meter level, Indian Ocean as well as the Pacific Ocean, there is some similar kinds of variations up there. But 4,000-meter, the variation only differs from 3 to 5 milliliter per liter in some regions of the different oceans. And we try to analyze vertical plots of dissolved oxygen in various locations. As for example, Bay of Bengal, the variation shows certain decrease in and increasing, similar with the Northwest Pacific Ocean. But in the Mediterranean region, there is a sudden decrease and another, and after 700-meter depth, there is a zigzag decreasing or increasing up to the 3,000-meter. Here we tried to show the results of the first glider mission deployed by the ASEAN, that is 17 days mission, November 10 to 27. So it is a devoted monitor offshore Moroccan Mediterranean waters. Figure 1 indicates the last 10 days of the mission aim to focus on the coastal areas of interest along the Moroccan coast. And right panel figures show the temperature and salinity occurred during the first part of the mission. The black lines are the isopicanal level and white dashed line is the depth of the mixed layer, that is density. And in here we just try to show the Marinomica sites for some prediction of the different variables. Here we showed one variables here 27th April to 15th May forecast, how it varies. The values are changes. Here you can see similar kinds of things in different hotspot regions of the Mediterranean Sea. So based on the study, it is found that the data needs are quite different depending on research background. Data needs not be easy to apply for irregular data sets. This needs shared information and tools among the community for data analysis. The mapping of the MU's gridded datasets gives us an overview of the horizontal and vertical distribution of dissolved oxygen. Daily or subject datasets surely helpful to see the seasonality changes during ocean extremes from the atmospheric science perspective. Thank you all for your kind patience and listening.
So thanks again for Matthias who pre-recorded this presentation, and then we are going next to Team Pacific O2, where we have Ivan and Anna from Chile who will present their results. So Ivan and Anna, if you can turn on your camera and take over as soon as we see your slides.
We'll give you the control of the screen. Okay, no, the control.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, there's. Okay, so good morning to everyone. My name is Ivan, and I'm going to be presenting this hackathon project that we made along with Anna, Opeyemi, and Maria. So as Sandra said before, they gave us just from where we use two of them, which is data exploitation and integrating cost. Two challenges into consideration. We three different objectives, which is to create a database, which we name it as Pacific O2, then create a toolbox for analyzing this data, to also make this data set public and be ruled by the FAIR principles. Now, as if you can see in the right side of the screen, which is the area that we are. We choose this area because most of us were already on it in this with different products, but so it has some interesting features, like, for example, the upwellings, because this corresponds Eastern Pacific. So we have here the upwelling zones, high productivity, the oxygen minimum zones, and because of it, and also have an impact on local communities, we pick this area as our region of interest. So in this slide, we have a little bit of a summary, a brief summary of the whole. So the idea is to pick different coastal databases and open ocean databases and put them into a common database, which we name it as Pacific O2. Well, we have here 2 points, which is we hope that we can make this grid product, as Babin does in his paper for his high resolution atlas. But it's a really difficult task and an utopic idea that we had. And also, once we have all these data from different sources into this Pacific O2 database, we implemented this toolbox for the data. You can analyze time series, extract subregions inside the parent region. Also has the T or that sort of stuff. So in a little bit of more details, during the hackathon, we were working with World Ocean Database and Mirai Database for the open ocean. And for coastal bases, we were working with mooring data from different institutions, cruise, CTDs, profiles, Winkler, and gliders. So we made some functions in MATLAB format. We only made this function in MATLAB because it's like our main language, software language, but we hope to update this, to upgrade these functions so that we can implement it for Python or R. So pretty much is that with the function. So the idea is to, for example, read Mirai data and download it into a file, which it could be a .NIT-CDF file, or it could be a MATLAB.mat, or a CSV, depending on what the user wants. So in the left side of the screen, we have pretty much one of the arguments that we do to this of the integration, which is because, for example, if you want to pick data from equator to the 20 south degrees, we may only choose World Ocean Database, but if we want to go farther south, we saw Mirai data. So it is important to have these sources of databases, so because they complement each other. So now all the functions, as I said before, updating and uploading these functions into a public GitHub that we made for the hackathon. And well, this GitHub, as I said, we only have a MATLAB version of this but we hope to implement it for other languages. So currently, the toolbox that we are working with has only the oxygenation trend function, but we hope to, with the time, to implement another functions, estimate modes of variability, calculate some oxygen threshold for marine organisms, the oxygenation drivers, or also climatologies. So that's pretty what we do for these hackathon projects. So I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening to this presentation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ivan. And I think I would hand over to Denise, who is, I think still moderating this, for taking questions if there are any. I mean, we are in between you and your lunch break. So, but thanks a lot, Ivan.
For this presentation. I wish you best of luck going forward too. We will now break lunch. It's a nice late European style lunch. So we will get back together again at 14:45 to 2:45 p.m.
Yeah, so lunch also you'll find plenty of restaurant outside, okay? And we'll reconvene in 1 hour and 15 minutes.
Where do you get lunch around here?